We're up to 7,000 tests, so it's a dramatic increase, 1,600 new tests. What happens when the testing capacity increases? The number of positives increase by definition. So the number of new cases has gone up 221 to 950 cases. And you can see New York City is increasing. Westchester is still disproportionate to the population of Westchester. That still represents the New Rochelle cluster. Nassau 109, Suffolk 63, Rockland 16, Albany 12, Orange 11, Dutchess 10, Monroe 9, Ulster 7. Number of new cases, New York City and Westchester. Some in Nassau, some in Suffolk. But you'll see the cases rise in the most dense areas because that's where people are transferring the virus among themselves. Counties with new cases today: Allegheny, Onondaga, Ontario, and Wyoming. So you see the spread continues. Most impacted states in the United States, we are now 950, number one in the country, 676 for Washington State. Again, these cases are more an example of how many tests you're doing and who you're testing, rather than a raw number of cases in that area. Our deaths have increased to 7. Washington is the next highest at 42. Total deaths in the United States, 67. Hospitalizations, 158 out of 950. That's 17% of the cases. When we talk about hospital capacity, just take that 17%. And it's always, if you notice, 14%, 15%, 16%, 17%. Run that 17% against whatever you think the total infected population will be. And then compare that to our hospital capacity. And that will keep you up at nights. Hence, the situation that Dr. Zucker and myself and my colleagues are in. Again, perspective. I went through the numbers in Italy. I went through the numbers in South Korea and China last night. You look at all these numbers, they're the same story. You look at the deaths in New York, it's the same story. People who had underlying illnesses, if they got the flu in a normal season, they would be in grave trouble. Instead, they got the coronavirus and they had existing illnesses and they passed away. Remember, before any of this, somebody would pass away in a hospital, an older person, and you would say, how did they die? And they would say, pneumonia. You'd say, pneumonia? Well, how'd they catch pneumonia? Well, it wasn't really pneumonia. It was they had heart disease. They had emphysema. They were struggling with cancer. And then the pneumonia becomes the accelerant to a bad situation. And that's what's happening here. Any of my colleagues, additional points? Why don't you make them? Melissa?
No.
Robert? Questions?
You said that gyms will be closed. Can you elaborate on that? And also, did you confer with City Hall or Mayor de Blasio on this? Because he was at the gym this morning and just wondering if he knew about the fact that you're going to close.
He can be in the gym this morning. You can be in the gym this afternoon. You can be in the gym this evening. You just can't be in the gym after 8 o'clock.
Should you be using the gym already as is with social distancing?
Yeah, you can use the gym.
Have you been using the gym?
Are you asking me if I go to a public gym?
Yeah, you do. Or gym in general?
Yeah, I have my own workout routine that I have developed over a number of years that I do alone. So I don't do it in the gymnasium.
Doctor,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Governor, have you heard back from the White House about the matter of deploying the Army Corps of Engineers?
We're having ongoing conversations. None have been conclusive.
What's the overall prediction or projection for the number of people who could potentially get this in New York? And what's the overall projection for the need for hospital beds? I mean, I know we've got like a cap of like 50,000 or so beds, but what's the need looking like at this point?
Yeah, that's an unfair question for Commissioner Zucker because it's anyone's guess, but I'll recommend this to you. Google that question and you will get a range from 40% to 80% of the population. Merkel said what, 70%? 60% of her population. 40% to 60%. So take 40% to 60% of 18 million, take a hospitalization rate of our sample of about 17%, and then compare that to 50,000 hospital beds. You will then break out in a sweat, maybe hives. You will feel great anxiety, panic attack, and you'll be right.
How's the state workforce? What are the plans in place? I know you have restrictions downstate, but I drove in today. The Empire State Plaza seems to be full. And as you're telling local governments get to 50%, what about state workers here in Albany?
Yeah, that was yesterday's policy. Today's policy is non-essential workers, a minimum of 50% of the workforce for our state government and every local government in the state.
Governor, are you requesting that the federal government shut schools, shut businesses, shut bars, restaurants? It seems like that's where you're headed.
I want federal guidance, Jesse. You can't have one state taking actions that are different than other states. There are ways to do it. You could say, if your state has a density index of over X, if you have more than this many cases, then this. But when you leave it, this is like the reverse federalism. This is a national pandemic, and there are no national rules. So, literally, the national news broadcasts today would cause somebody to panic. Everybody on their own with all these hodgepodge. Just say, you don't even have to make it mandatory. Just let the federal government say, here's what we think you should do, so I know what Connecticut is going to do and Massachusetts is going to do and Pennsylvania is going to do, or they're likely to do, so I do the same thing. Look how much damage you can do. I close down my bars. Jersey doesn't close down their bars. Everybody drives to Jersey to drink. Everybody drives home. It makes no sense.
By extension, though, did you try to include Massachusetts, Vermont, Pennsylvania, other regional states in this compact?
I did not get there here. We are the tri-state area. We have the most interaction. Obviously, part of New York abuts Massachusetts, and Alan Shartock goes back and forth. Part of it goes, we have contiguous with Pennsylvania also. We did convene them for the marijuana regional discussion. We started here. We will be expanding. But this was quite an elaborate undertaking because you had to align 3 states' policies. So this is not just consultative. We actually all adopted the same policies, Jesse. I don't ever remember this happening, period.
So presumably does this preempt what Mayor de Blasio announced last night in terms of closings of...
This preempts what any mayor anywhere or county executive anywhere in the state said. The same point I make about the national government is even more true on the state level. You can't close bars in Manhattan but leave them open in Nassau, because now everybody drives to Nassau for the bar. You have to have one set of rules that are uniform. And that's why in an emergency situation, there's actually a protocol that makes sense. Local governments can set rules, the state can override those rules, and the federal government can override state rules. Because it's not a situation where you can allow all these disparate policies. They are actually counter not only to common sense, but they're counter to public safety and they're counter to public health.
Why not do the same thing with schools then in New York? Why not you just have a blanket policy, they're all closed, like the city going to be closed?
We will.
What do you mean you will? I mean, you will.
We will.
When is that going to happen?
People that have tested positive. So about 86% of the schools are closed already statewide.
Right.
We have talked to SED this morning. We are closing the remaining 14%. That will go into effect by Wednesday.
So then, is there a date specific as to when they would reopen?
We're starting with 2 weeks, and then we'll adjust as it makes sense moving forward.
So just so I'm clear, by the end of the day, this afternoon, you'll be closing all schools for 2 weeks?
Yes.
Well, yeah, and we'll have an announcement this afternoon on the specifics of that, because people want to know exactly how and when and what hour, et cetera.
Why just a 2 week period? Obviously, New York City's closed for, a month or so. Why just start at 2 weeks and then reevaluate it? Is that kind of
Reevaluate, that's all it is.
It's a
And look,
calculation.
if in 2 weeks, miraculously, everything is fine, I'll reopen every school in New York in 2 weeks. So
2 weeks, all schools in the state closed for 2 weeks at least.
yeah, I haven't communicated with SED yet, Jesse, so that's what we're planning. We will have specific guidelines that we announced this afternoon.
Governor, the 950 people who have tested positive for coronavirus, have any of them self-resolved or gotten better at this point?
Sure.
Sure, we've actually had patients discharged from the hospital. 16 have been discharged from the hospital. And I am sure there are many people out there that we have not tested who have gotten coronavirus and have gotten better that are out there in the community. And is
Track of how many people have tested positive and how many people are now well?
we're tracking all of that information, yes.
And
Excuse me, just look at these numbers, please. Where are they for you? Since it started, 169,000 cases, 77,000 recovered on the 169 since it started. 85,000 are pending, which means they're still ill. 6,000 passed away. I'm sorry.
What about
Just to go back to Jesse for a second. Jesse, I want a uniform policy on the schools also, because, you have two-parent families who have children in schools, businesses that are operating that have employees with children in different school districts. So we want to get a uniform school closing policy also, and that's what we're working with SED about. So hold on the details of the school closing policy, but we will be closing all schools. That is true, and I then want to have a uniform policy so we have a semblance of normalcy.
Is that sort of similar to what you're doing downstate? You want to ensure that there's child care?
Yes, sir.
Meals?
Yes, sir. And I want to make sure every school district is in a position to do that, and they know it's coming, and they're preparing for it.
do you guys need to suspend their billing practices while they're closed? Asking
Did
for
gyms?
one who hasn't been to a gym in a while?
My gym did, but I don't have a gym.
Governor,
But I don't know what the other gym's policy is going to be.
Governor, what's going to happen with the budget at this point? And should there be money set aside, like a rainy day fund set aside for when we're still dealing with this several months down the road?
There should be a rainy day fund set aside. There should be a snowstorm fund set aside. There should be a fog fund set aside. All those set aside should be done. Obviously, I'm kidding. The budget, I asked the controller to give me his re-estimate of the revenues. Let's just take a second on this because it's important that you understand. The essential element in the budget is the projection of revenues. And that's why there's always a disagreement on the revenue projection, and we have this whole elaborate process to come up with a consensus revenue forecast. We did a revenue forecast. Since we did a revenue forecast, the world has changed 180 degrees 3 times, okay? I asked the controller for a revenue forecast. He's doing it. You turn on the television, you look at the stock market, you tell me what the revenue forecast is. My best guess is our revenue forecast was outrageously high compared to what is going on. How high, who knows? Rob Mujica, who can be an optimist for very brief intervals of time, says that there's a theory that the market is a V. It dropped quickly, and it's going to come up quickly. That's a theory. What is the effect of these businesses that are closing down? How much revenue did they lose? And how much less tax revenue will we get? How many people will be laid off and not earning income? And how much tax revenue will we lose? There is no doubt that the revenues are going to be way down. So, rainy day fund, that was my attempt at humor, have a rainy day fund, a number of reserve funds. That is very true. On top of that, you have the Medicaid redesign team coming back, which is trying to close what was already a $2.5 billion hole. We now have a new complication that could only happen in a world of total chaos. The federal government is passed the first coronavirus bill, which I have lamented, $8 billion. New York State only gets $35 million. They're now passing a new coronavirus bill. In that coronavirus bill, New York State gets the lowest level of reimbursement. They do it based off the Medicaid funds. New York State gets 50% of their Medicaid funds reimbursed. Some states get 75%. No state gets less than 50%. In raw dollars, we do very well, but that's only because we spend more than anybody else. But in that bill, they tucked in a provision that said you can make no changes whatsoever to your Medicaid program, which means, if you want to take the literal approach, the MRT, which is recommending changes in the Medicaid program, cannot be accepted because of that federal bill. Why the federal government would have passed the written in language that says you can't make any changes to your Medicaid program, why our New York delegation allowed it when they knew in January we had an MRT, Mike Dowling, Dennis Rivera were heading it. The second time we did it to find improvements, I have no idea.
I read those provisions. My read was that there's one that basically says you can't cut benefits for people, which I don't think you were hoping to do anyway. And the other one says you can't do what you tried to do, which is to shift more of the share of costs on the counties. So counties and the city of New York are delighted that you've lost on the second provision.
I understand your position. Would you like to make a wager, my friend, that you are incorrect?
Incorrect on what? I read the bill and I talked to the Senator Schumer's
I know, we went through this. Oh, okay, so you want to make a wager that you are wrong.
Casinos, I don't think you can.
I will wager you that you are wrong, that you misread the bill, that the bill says you can't make any changes to the Medicaid program which would preempt the MRT changes. I have no doubt that they did it as political protection. You're half right. They did it for political protection so the counties wouldn't have to pay anything more, which is ironic, by the way, since we voluntarily now pay all the excess from the counties, which we did on our own. The federal government never said you should pay all the increased costs, but they now want to tell us you can't raise it. It also said, do you have the language here? Yes. Wait, don't read it yet. How much are we wagering?
I'll bet you beer.
Okay. Read the language.
Yeah, it says you can't change any eligibility standards or methodologies. It also says you can't make any changes to any of the enrollment standards going forward. It talks about making changes to any premiums.
I'll take the beer right now, as a matter of fact, because you're not going to be able to give it to me after 8 o'clock.
And it also refers to any kind of income checks or any qualifying checks. So it goes on and on. But it basically limits substantially the ability of the MRT to do what the MRT was intended to do.
And here's the problem, Jimmy. Without the MRT, you can't balance the budget. So I spoke to Senator Schumer. They tried to say, oh no, all we did was protect the local governments in New York City. This provision goes well beyond that, says no MRT. You can't do a budget without the MRT. Now we can't do a budget until they fix that anyway. I spoke to Senator Schumer. I spoke to Congresswoman Lowy. I'm calling Congresswoman Speaker Pelosi. But it was a terrible blunder by the federal government. And it makes it impossible to do the budget, and they have to fix it, and they have to change it.
Last question. Speaking of that, the Senate and Assembly just canceled session for the day, postponed till at least Wednesday. I know you had some bills that you wanted them to do this week. Is that going to crimp in your plans?
No, Wednesday's fine. April 1 is the budget.
But didn't you have things like this week with the petition gathering numbers and paid sick leave?
No, I did the petition by executive order. That's done. Well, what they don't pass is the paid sick leave, which also gave people pay for their quarantine period. So I'm sure the people who are in quarantine and wanted to get paid wish that they voted for the bill so they could get paid.
Governor, you waived the 7-day waiting period on unemployment benefits. We're hearing reports that...
On what I'm saying?
On the unemployment benefits?
Yes, sir.
It seems like people...
It's going to be fine. It's the second quarter. I understand that. It'd be a very difficult quarter, but I don't need to have labels on this. We'll take it one step. Again, this is the key point that if you just allow me a moment, for some reason, some friends of ours have written in, prominent people, that we haven't done anything fiscally.
Right now to
That's
Larry
all the Fed.
It's
not true.
To Governor
the President said
Andrew Cuomo,
in his speech Wednesday night and again on
his
presser on Friday, I'll say it again, we have roughly $400 billion in, I prefer to think of it as fiscal assistance. And one of them is in the bill that got through the House. Obviously, the unpaid sick leave and all that goes with that. That's one. Second one is enormous support for small and medium-sized businesses, which will be made larger because of the declaration of the Emergency Stafford Act, which allows us to draw a lot of funds from FEMA, for example, as well as the SBA. Another is the deferral of the income tax for businesses and individuals for 3 months. That's penalty-free, interest rate penalty-free. That pretty much gets you to $400 billion right there. Look, on top of that, we're deferring the interest on student loans till the end of the year. Interest on student loans. I don't have a number estimate on that yet, but that's part of our package. We're buying about $75 million worth of oil to stop the shenanigans from Saudi Arabia and Russia and to protect American oil companies. We're going to do that at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And on top of that, Beg your pardon?
What was the number?
75 million is the target. And on top of that, I want to remind the payroll tax holiday is a serious proposal, a very serious proposal. And we'll be discussing all that with the Senate and House leadership. But that one, till year end, provides cash flow and liquidity to both employers and employees. It also has an economic incentive. You'll get to keep more of what you earn. And I think that's great. And that thing, as you know, the payroll tax is really directly a middle-class tax. It's a blue-collar tax, middle-class tax, et cetera, et cetera. It's very important. So, and that has, I'm not going to hang a number on that, but it's going to be, all I'm trying to say, and I appreciate your indulgence here, we have an enormous fiscal plan. It's at least $800 billion and maybe more. We're working with Congress to do it, but much of it can be done through executive authorities. And again, to quote the president, we will use whatever federal powers are available. And then I'll just add, and maybe then some. All right, let me just a couple more and then I'll get out of here. Yes, ma'am.
Which industries need help when so many businesses are shutting down right now?
Well, we're talking with everybody. They're calling in, communication lines. One of the things about this, and it cuts both ways, there's good news and not so good news, is the ability of this administration to work with the private sector. The really good news was what the big retailers and drugstores and so forth, how they're going to help us on virus testing. That's a great example of American free enterprise at work. The bad news is we're going to have to work with them if they have cash flow shortages. But we're in touch with all the groups and their representatives, and we'll be sorting through that. Just a couple more. Yes, ma'am.
Supply chain in China. Is this the death knell for supply chains in China? You talked about executive action. Isn't that something the president's considering addressing via executive action?
Well, I don't want to generalize. I'll say one thing, and I will speak for myself here, not yet for the president, though I know he's interested in this. We haven't endorsed it yet. If we provided a 100% immediate write-off, expensing is what it's called, okay? You follow me? Depreciation, 100% immediate for structures, for equipment, for R&D, for intellectual property, 100%. That would pay for the moving expenses of American companies based in China to come home. Right there, that would pay for their moving expenses, 100% immediate expensing. And make it permanent. Make it permanent. It'll help everybody. It'll help everybody come home. But, yeah, we are leery of that. Yes, Jennifer.
Have the airlines actually called in and asked for that assistance? You said you've been talking to people.
Lots of them. Yeah, I don't want to tell you what.
Asked for some sort of assistance.
I don't want to tell you what they're saying. We're in touch about their balance sheets and their cash flows. Just a couple more. I want to be fair as I can. Yes, ma'am, please.
I have a question.
Yes.
Twofold. One is about retirement funds. What do you say to Americans who are worried about their retirement funds and who are even thinking about pulling out their money from their 401ks? And the second thing is, what do you say to Americans who are just simply scared when they're seeing these market drops?
Those are hard things to opine on, and I don't want to suggest great wisdom. Look, this market decline is tough. It's very tough. My own view, right or wrong, better or worse, I've always advocated long-term investing for myself, my family, and for everybody. So, as I've said before, and others have said this, Mr. Mnuchin said this, Warren Buffett has said this, I guess. To me, when you see these big dips, these big drops, they're buying opportunities if you're a long-term investor. And in the long run, just like coming out of the 87 problem, just like coming out of 2008 and 2009, the market came back and, exceeded the record. So I would counsel patience and calmness, and I think long-term investors should have a look at some buying opportunities here. It's the best I can do. I'm not a sage, and I don't have a perfect crystal ball on this thing, but that's my take. Yes, ma'am.
Larry, have you talked to the president about this morning's market drop, and how would you characterize his response to that? That's number one. And number two, we've been assured in recent weeks that the fundamentals of the economy are strong.
Yes, I believe so. Important point, and so does the president. fundamentals of the economy are strong. In fact, we've had so many business groups in, they'll tell you, through January, February, the economy was rising. And the Atlanta Fed GDP now is showing 3% or 3.1%. We don't have the March data in yet. Yes, I believe that. And I think, again, prior policies on low taxes and regulations and trade and oil and energy have helped enormously. I believe this is a short-term problem. I believe it's a matter of weeks and months. It is not a matter of years. And regarding the president, I was with him this morning. We had our G7 teleconference meeting. You haven't asked me about that, but he was very calm about the market, and it is what it is. We think it's going to get better, but that's, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I might add, on the G7 call, it was a fabulous call. We had, the U.S. is hosting, so we're the president of the G7 this term, and we met with the other leaders, and the degree of cooperation and coordination was fantastic. I mean, everybody basically, and I've seen them around the table a couple times, not so fantastic coordinated, but today, basically, they all want to do whatever it takes on the health side, solving the virus side, and on the economic side. We just heard that from one president, prime minister after another, and they agreed, by the way, that the leaders will keep meeting regularly. The health ministers and finance ministers will meet on a regular basis. There's enormous coordination, and the theme, again, is whatever it takes. This was a G7 theme this morning. The president led that conference call.
Larry,
yes, sir.
You said you were working toward $800 billion in fiscal relief.
In round numbers,
right?
yeah.
And you've got about half of that so far?
That's correct.
The other half would come mostly through payroll tax cut?
That's payroll tax holiday. That's correct. And that holiday would be through the end of the year. And I'm reluctant to price it out. It won't be less than $400 billion because I don't know the parameters of it and the details, and there's always bickering about cost. But yes, that's our view. And I just wanted to make that clear. People may like what we're doing or not, but we have a plan. Some folks have been writing and saying you haven't done anything, and that's just not true. I'm sorry.
You said earlier, were you saying immediate and expensing for companies that relocate their supply chains away from China?
That's one thought.
Is that a proposal?
That's one thought. It's not formal. It's something we're thinking about. I want to emphasize that. And it could be more widespread, John. It might not apply just to folks moving out of China. It may apply to everybody in the economy. I've always believed that 100% expensing, whether it's plants, equipments, structures, renovations, I think that's one of the most powerful growth tools we have. And also on the corporate tax cut side, which it is the middle class, blue collars who benefit the most from that kind of thing. So at the moment, I'm tossing it out. It's something we're thinking about. I'm not here to form. The president hasn't signed off on it, and so it's just something we're thinking about. Just one more. I don't want to.
Larry,
yes,
can you speak more? Given the
thank you.
Given the short-term layoffs we're seeing because of the coronavirus, would the administration consider sending cash directly to households with some sort of relief?
We might. We've got in the bill, there are provisions, and with also executive authorities for short-term unemployment insurance or compensation. That's a possibility. We have standby authority, as I say. Part of the $400 billion I was talking about is emergency authorities. There's FEMA funds. There's Treasury funds that could be used in a pinch. So the answer could be yes. I don't want to be definitive on that. I'm just trying to be helpful. One more. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Real quick. So the interest rate cut over the weekend announced, possibly down to zero. Yet today the markets open up struggling, and the circuit breaker kicks in again. Do you think there was some fear there among investors? Does that look like a desperation move, or what's going on there?
I don't know. It's hard to know. As I walked out, the market had come back
What's the ultimate goal of reducing it, do you think?
I think the Fed is correctly, and I want to really support their actions, as the president did last evening, correctly concerned about liquidity and various short-term cash flow issues, exactly the sorts we're talking about here. The Fed has enormous power. and it looks like they're going to start using it in connection with the Treasury Department and the President and the Executive Branch. So that the market will react. I can't predict short-term market flows. I think in the long run it's a buy. Others may disagree. One more, Jennifer, you go.
To clarify on the G7, sir, was there any specific course of action that everyone agreed to other than just to keep in touch?
Well, it was... Yes, let me rephrase that, because every one of those countries is engaging in very heavy monetary assistance and very heavy fiscal assistance, whether it's tax cuts or government spending or deregulation or their central banks or the ECB and so forth. Every one of them's doing it. And we have a detailed laundry list. I can't go through it now, but they're working hard. And the reason I say it is that I've been to a couple of these G7 leaders conferences as the American sure, but they're not always so agreeable, but they are today. And it was a wonder to see, And I would also say Prime Minister Abe, who is a great leader, mentioned how much he wanted to hold the Olympics in Tokyo this summer. He doesn't know if he can, but he would like to. He believes that would be a great leadership issue for the whole world. And President Trump wished him luck on that. We're all behind him on that. I got to jump. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
White House Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow, the White House Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow there with an impromptu news conference with some reporters gathered there. This as markets firmly in the red, but off the worst levels of the session. The S&P 500 paring its decline to 6% after earlier tripping the market-wide circuit breaker for the third time in a week. The market's fear gauge also, the volatility spiking toward levels last seen during the financial crisis. Treasury yields, they have pared some of their investors taking profits after those dramatic moves from the Federal Reserve and other central banks bolstered fixed income. The Fed getting out its bazooka over the weekend, injecting liquidity and cutting a full point over the weekend on Sunday, and those liquidity operations continuing today with the Fed purchasing treasuries. Right now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average 7% lower, down 1,603 points. The S&P 500 174 points lower. That's down 6.5%. The Nasdaq Composite Index down 510 points. That's a decline of 6.5%. Measure of volatility, the VIX over 76 right now. 2-year yield at 0.32. That is down 16 basis points. The 10-year at 0.80. That's down 15 basis points. We check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day. I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. Balance of Power now with David Weston.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, welcome to the second hour of Balance of Power. Markets and businesses and governments struggle to come to terms with the coronavirus, just as we just heard from Larry Kudlow outside the White House. But let's face it, until we know how bad the public health situation is, none of us can know how to react. To give us a sense of when we might get some answers, or at least indications, we welcome now Carrie Althoff, Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Johns Hopkins. So welcome. Great to have you with us, Professor. Again, I can't ask you for a date or a time or a place, but give us a sense of what we should be looking at. We keep talking about this curve and the flattening out of the curve. Is there anything we can learn from China, from Italy, from other countries about when it might flatten out?
Thank you for having me. First of all, I appreciate what you're doing to help inform your listeners. You know, what we're doing right now is we're trying to get that testing up and going nationwide. I hear the reports that it's coming, and I think that will tell us a lot more about exactly where we are in the epidemic when we have more information about transmission that's going on within communities. I think the answer about how we're flattening the curve lies with every single person in this country and the personal decision making everyone's undergoing right now to determine if they're going to be socially distancing themselves.
So I was just speaking with a doctor at the University of Milan who reported that it appears that the rate of increase in the virus infection in Lombardy appears to be flattening out. That is to say, it's not going up as fast as it would. Flat is probably overstating it. Is that an encouraging sign? Maybe Italy might be slowing down?
All of those are encouraging signs. All of those are encouraging signs that what they're doing in terms of closing their businesses, closing their schools are really going to make a difference here.
By the way, that's what he said, that's what's done the trick, or doing the trick, he hopes.
We know that when we create distance between ourselves and others, when there's an infectious agent out there circulating, that really does make a population level impact. And we want to prevent our friends, our neighbors, our communities from becoming ill. And we want to make sure that if someone does become ill, our hospitals, our healthcare systems, our healthcare providers have the resources that they need to care for everyone. So by staying home, by creating that social distance, we can help slow this epidemic down so that we can get people the care that they need and we can stay safe.
Is one of the ironies here, actually, we may be slowing it down, but it'll look the reverse, because as we test more, we'll get more results, we assume. And so even as we're cutting back, the number will keep going for a little bit at least.
It will. I mean, Italy was testing earlier in their epidemic at a wider scale. As we roll out testing, anytime you roll out testing, you're not only going to see the people who were really recently infected, but you're going to also see individuals who may have been infected for multiple days at that point when they're tested. So yes, we will see what we call a big bump in the numbers initially here, and then after that some time subsides, then we'll start to get a better grasp.
But that bump doesn't necessarily mean it's not working, is your message. Okay, thank you so much to Professor Kerry Altuff of Johns Hopkins. Coming up here, he is an expert on the technology of biology. Jamie Metzel of the Atlantic Council is here to tell us what we missed and what we can do the next time. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Jason Kelly and Carol Massar speak to some of the most informed people in the world. The Bloomberg Business app and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg studios with you right now with the update on the markets. Firmly in the red, but certainly off the worst levels of the session for the major averages. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down right now 7.3%. We're down 1,671 points. The S&P 500 down 180 points. That's a decline of 6.6% right now. And the NASDAQ Composite Index, 521 points lower. That is down 6.6%. But again, off the worst levels of the session when we were limit down with the futures this morning. And then the circuit breakers kicked in just a few minutes into the trading session today. And that was the 15-minute pause that we had at the opening of the market. Remarkable volatility in the markets right now. The VIX over 76, almost 77 right now. And as we look at treasuries after the Fed's repo operations and cutting rates and its emergency action yesterday, 2-year yield right now 0.33, the 10-year 0.81%, and the long bond right now 1.46%. And we're looking at crude oil again. That is lowered. NYMEX crude below 30, down $2 a barrel. That's a decline of 6.3%. And we check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. And back to David and Balance of Power. Good to see you in the studio.
Good to see you, John Tucker. Thanks so much. From the Interactive Broker Studio, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. The coronavirus is not the first time in recent years we've had to respond to a viral epidemic. We had SARS in 2003, the avian flu in 2009, and MERS in 2012. And every time, experts warned that we needed to build longer-term mechanisms to prevent, detect, and deal with the problem. Welcome now an authority on what needs to be done this time. He's Jamie Metzel. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and author of Tracking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. We welcome him now. So, Jamie, thank you so much for being with us. What did we miss once again?
Well, this is the problem. Every time we have one of these crises, we think, geez, this is really terrible. It's really frightening. Next time, it could be much worse. And then the crisis passes and we let our guard down. And then, lo and behold, something terrible happens, and we say, "Well, why didn't we prepare?" And that's certainly in the case of this country, where actually, as everybody knows now, under President Obama, we set up a White House office to oversee and lead our response to global pandemics. And then the World Health Organization, which the United States helped create, we have been in many ways undermining not just the WHO, but the entire global system and the UN system. And it's at times like this when we all really need to come together. That's the downside. The upside is that the tools that we have to fight back are now greater than they've ever been at any time in our history.
So what would that White House office have done if they'd kept it up and running about things like not having enough test kits? Because wasn't there maybe a mistake in retrospect with the CDC not following the WHO protocols?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, the CDC thought that it could do better than the WHO protocols. And normally, I mean, our CDC is the best of its kind in the world, but obviously not in this case. So I'm a former White House official. I was on the National Security Council in the Clinton administration. And the role that you have when you're in the White House is, one, to see around corners, and two, to just make stuff happen within the federal bureaucracy, whatever it takes. My boss when I was on the NSC was the legendary Richard Clark, who's the guy who had essentially predicted 9/11.
I used to work with him at ABC News. We had him as a consultant, actually. Yeah, I know him well.
So Dick is a very close friend of mine, and that was his thing, is you have to see around corners, and then you have to crack skulls to get ready. Yes, our agencies could have done better, but the whole point of leadership, why we have an executive power that we've strengthened, and now it's frightening to people that the executive authority is as it is, but the reason why we've done it is so that when there is certainly before a crisis, when there's an early indication of a crisis. I mean, so literally late last year, early this year, there were some warning signs, some pretty significant warning signs coming out of China. And that's when a White House office would have ramped up. That's when, if we had an even more empowered World Health Organization with a global surveillance system, we would have said, all right, this is a warning. We're going to have an emergency response team from the WHO that's going to go to China. China wouldn't, in this alternate world, have the authority to hold off the WHO for many, many weeks while they did whatever they did. And so now we have to address this crisis. We need to recognize this is not the last crisis we're going to face, and we need to have a reckoning with how we're organizing ourselves nationally and globally to respond to these kinds of pandemics and crises more broadly.
It sounds right for the next crisis. Is it too late to do some fairly dramatic things with this crisis? And let me give you one specific example. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, yesterday in his news conference said we should have the Army Corps of Engineers come in and figure out how to handle the lack of capacity for ICU beds, because right now he's very concerned if there's an overwhelming of the hospitals, as we sort of saw in northern Italy, we won't have the ventilators and things. Should we be thinking about things just that dramatic?
Absolutely. And the reason is, when we just do the math, I was listening to an interview yesterday with a senior person from Hopkins, and this guy was saying, I'm very sanguine. I think there's a lot of panic, and the panic is causing harm. And the interviewer was pushing this guy and saying, all right, what percentage of the U.S. population do you think is going to be infected over the course of the coming year? And he said, well, it's not going to be huge. It's going to be about 20%. And what percentage what will the fatality rate be? And he said, it's not going to be the 3.4% from the WHO. It's going to be maybe a little bit lower than the 0.6%.
Yeah, do the math.
And he said, and what percentage of the total population is going to be infected? It's about 50%. And so 340 million. 50% of them is 170 million, and at a 0.5% fatality rate, that's 850,000 deaths. And so, I think hospitals around the country, certainly here in New York, are thinking about how to build tent cities and all these kinds of things. And hopefully, maybe at the end of the year, we'll laugh, we went crazy, it wasn't necessary. But these worst case scenarios are possibilities, and we have to plan against them.
And we heard Dr. Fauci yesterday on TV saying when you're overreacting, maybe you're getting it right. But unless you're overreacting, you can't hope to get it right. And if we look back and say we overreacted, that's one thing. But again, on the ICU beds with the ventilators, Governor Cuomo took us through the numbers for New York. And part of the problem is we don't have that many beds to begin with, but 80% of them are occupied. It's not like they're all waiting for patients to come in.
Yeah, and it's not like cancer goes away or heart disease goes away or any of that goes away. So yes, we don't have the capacity. And there's something worse, David. I mean, this disease is so highly contagious.
Yes.
The reason why I sounded the alarm in January, I spend a lot of time in China. I'm very familiar with the Chinese system. And so when China set up their emergency hospitals in January, and they've had 17 years of experience since SARS, so they take this stuff very, very seriously. And the hospitals that they set up, their doctors and nurses were very significantly infected. If the Chinese are having that problem, then we're going to have that problem. And so what happens when our doctors and nurses start getting infected with COVID-19? If we're going to probably have to quarantine them, but who's going to provide the kind of care and service that we need, even if we're able to expand capacity? So there's a lot of big questions out there.
Yeah, a lot of work to be done. At the same time, should we take at least some heart? Do you take a little heart, at least, from what the president announced on Friday with the enlisting of the private sector to get the testing up going?
Yeah, I mean, we're way behind. I mean, unfortunately, had we had better testing in the beginning, we would have at least had a better chance of using a containment strategy. So we're going to ramp up testing. It's going to take a few weeks or more. I mean, Korea is doing an incredible job, and it's a national. It's not just a national embarrassment. It's a national.
It's just
threat
leaving
that
us
we're
in the
doing.
dust. It's really quite extraordinary. Okay, many thanks to Jamie Metzel of the Atlantic Council. Really great to have you with us, Jamie. Coming up, Ohio and Florida say they're going to go ahead with their primaries tomorrow. We talk about how the virus may affect the election year. That's coming up next. We are on Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Listen, as a hiring manager, I've got to tell you, the best job candidate isn't always the typical candidate. Sometimes they're a grad of life.
Meet the grads of life. Young adults of unique determination and experience. An ideal fit for your company in an entry-level position, internship, or mentorship. They might not have every qualification you typically look for, but they're exactly who your company needs.
Sometimes the best candidates aren't the ones you're used to.
Go to gradsoflife.org to learn how to find, cultivate, and train this great pool of untapped talent. Brought to you by the Ad Council and gradsoflife.org.
Our relationship with Asia is simple. Find the most experienced journalists.
These countries will need each other more and more in the future.
Let them gather the best data and experts.
Let's get to Singapore now and our guest.
Then bring everything they find straight to you.
Let's talk about where you are. There's quite a lot of headwinds there too.
Actually, it's not simple. It's just better. Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. This is Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Louisiana and Georgia have postponed their primaries, but Ohio and Illinois say their polls will be...
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
It's a little bit of an easy call. Actually, both states have sort of these staggered primaries where you have
the possibility of a runoff election. In Georgia, there's a presidential primary before all the other offices have their primaries later on. And so they're just pushing back those primaries to a later previously scheduled election date.
Now, one of the things we heard from the governor of Ohio, DeWine, as well as the governor of Illinois, yesterday, Pritzker, is maybe there won't be as many people at the polling places because they've used early voting quite extensively.
Yeah, every state seems to be moving in that direction, and but still, a lot of people like to show up on election day. It's sort of it's an event, and so there's really a question about how this is going to affect the in-person voting tomorrow. On the one hand, you have older people who are more susceptible to the virus and may decide for health reasons not to go out. But you also have a lot of college campuses closing and sending kids home, and so those college-age kids might not vote. The older demographic tends to vote for Biden. The younger demographic tends to vote for Sanders, so maybe those cancel each other out. We'll just have to see.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, Greg, because obviously the most important thing is people's health and safety, but we do have an election going on and a nomination process. Can we handicap it all? Can we war game this out? We saw that debate last night on CNN with no audience there between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Can we even guess at whether this is helping or hurting one of them over the other?
You know, it's changing the dynamic in a lot of different ways. On the one hand, Bernie Sanders tends to get a lot of energy from big rallies, and he can't hold those anymore. So that hurts him. We talked about how the in-person vote demographics may change. And then the other thing is it's really sort of changed the argument for what kind of a nominee Democrats should want. And the Biden argument, you saw this on full display last night in the debate, is that we don't have time for revolution right now. We need a competent, steady hand in this time of crisis.
Yeah, the one thing that seems clear is if this keeps going, it's not going to help President Trump. That's for darn sure. Okay, many thanks now to Greg Corte. He is Bloomberg national political correspondent reporting from Washington. Coming up here, we're going to talk to Professor Tyler Cohen of George Mason University about how the virus could change aspects of the U.S. economy over the longer term. Things as, for example, how we entertain ourselves at home with streaming video. He's written about that as a Bloomberg opinion piece. That is really coming up on Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are falling 7% over concerns of the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak. Crude oil is down over 6.5%. Well, the U.S. economy is showing the strain of the pandemic. Goldman Sachs predicts the economy will stagnate this quarter and contract by 5% in the second quarter, which begins in April. That would be the worst showing since the last recession. But Goldman Sachs also sees rebounds in the second half of the year. Well, airlines worldwide are shrinking operations to only a trickle of flights, severing global links and putting hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk as they fight to preserve cash and survive the coronavirus pandemic. A trade group warns many carriers will be pushed into bankruptcy. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Why is delivering the best client experience a top priority at BNY Mellon's Pershing? Michelle Feinstein, Director of Client Engagement, explains.
Today's investors want a financial relationship that's on demand, customized, and leverages the latest digital technology. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, helping advisory firms and broker-dealers create great experiences for their clients is our priority. Through our integrated wealth experience, we give you a high-touch service, flexible technology choices, and expert insights, so you can deliver a highly personalized experience to your clients at every step, from onboarding to wealth planning, to performance analysis and more. And because we're part of BNY Mellon, you'll benefit from more than 230 years of strength and stability. At Pershing, we're personally invested in your success.
Visit Pershing.com to learn more about Pershing's integrated wealth experience. Pershing LLC and Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Revisions, return policies. There are so many ways to redo a decision.
What are the ramifications if she crumbles or doesn't crumble?
Do they have any path other than the courts?
Except here, we have to get it right the first time.
We always talk about the losers in a trade war. Are there winners?
So that you can too.
How does your modeling have to pivot to reflect a different scenario?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Coming up on Balance of Power, a sharp V-shaped recovery or something longer lasting and more troubling. We talk with George Mason economics professor Tyler Cowen about the alternatives. But first, let's get a market check with John Tucker.
All right, David, we are firmly in the red, appearing the earlier losses. Right now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 1,846 points. That's a decline of just under 8%. The S&P 500, 198 points lower. That's down 7%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 579 points. That's a decline of 7.4%. A measure of volatility up at near record levels. The VIX at 78 right now. Just alone, that is up 35%, that index. And David, I actually want to look at some of the stocks that are up. This indicates to me that maybe people are home, stocking up on food, getting Clorox, eating jelly, and connecting from home to work. Kroger shares right now, the S&P 500, up 6%. You look at shares of Clorox, they're up almost 5.5%. J.M. Smucker, for some reason, is up 4.4%. We also seeing a rise in some of the telecom stocks, people using that to connect to work from home. And you look at treasuries right now after the Fed's reaction to markets yesterday on Sunday by cutting rates and continuing with repo operations. The 2-year yield at 0.35%. The benchmark 10-year note in the U.S. at 0.81%. And that is down right now 14 basis points. The 30-year yield is right now at 1.46%. We're seeing crude oil continuing to decline. NYMEX crude down $2.40 a barrel. It's under 30 at 29.31. And we check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues with David Weston.
Thank you so much, John Tucker, and thank you so much for finding some stocks that are up. That's good.
There are a few of them, believe it or not.
It's not that easy. That's a lot of hard work. Good for you, John. Okay, the coronavirus first hit the Chinese economy, of course, but now it's rapidly spreading around the world, and markets continue to anticipate the damage to the U.S. economy and U.S. businesses. But will it be a short, sharp downturn or something more profound? Welcome now, Tyler Cowen. He is professor of economics at George Mason University and a Bloomberg opinion contributor. So welcome, Professor. It's great to have you with us. We can't know at this point because it depends on that virus and how we treat it. But give us the sort of over and under here. Is this a short downturn that we can bounce back from, or is this going to last longer?
Here's why this is a difficult situation to understand. In the very short term, we actually want economic activity to contract and pretty much everyone to stay at home. And that's unlike any other macroeconomic problem we've ever faced. My worry for the negative scenario is that there could be a second wave of the virus in the winter, and then uncertainty would remain, and then it would be a very nasty, lasting recession with unusual properties. There's still a positive case scenario that when we get to June or July, there's a huge boom. That's possible, but it's certainly not something that's in the bag at the moment.
So in the last hour over on television, I talked to Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, and he said it's a little bit like putting a patient into a coma to get over something so you can bring them back out. So to your point, we want the economy sort of to shut down so we're not transmitting this disease. How do we do whatever we can to make sure the patient comes out of the coma in reasonably decent shape?
I think the key is to have small and medium-sized businesses stay up and running and maintain contacts with their employees and remain both liquid and solvent. It's very hard for the government to do that in a targeted manner. I'm working on plans for that right now in a piece I'm writing. But that's the key. If everyone is really up and ready to go, I'm really quite sure we can do it. But if places go out of business and send their workers home permanently, it's going to be much tougher. And if there are financial problems in the meantime, that also could make it worse.
So this is one of the debates that people are having, at least in the abstract. Is it broad? Some people, as you know, are suggesting just get $1,000 into everybody's pocket across the entire country. Others are saying it should be targeted. But one of the challenges with targeting is the targets get to be more and more. Obviously, the travel industry, there are reports right now that the administration may be working on some sort of a bailout or help for the aviation industry. I just had an email cross my Bloomberg saying that 400,000 people have signed a petition calling for beauty industry federal aid package to help beauty workers, because after all, they're hourly people and they're going to be out of money. If you start targeting, is there any limit to the number of targets there will be?
The problem with targeting is that some of these businesses, you actually want them to contract over the longer term. So the cruise ship sector, maybe that won't come back for 5, 10, 20 years. So you don't want to maintain it at its current level. A lot of economic activities involving face-to-face contact, I think it depends how long the virus will stick around for. Again, if it's only a few months, most of these things will come back fairly quickly. I think it's a good idea to send $1,000 to everyone, but I don't think it will solve the fundamental problems either.
So in some of your pieces for Bloomberg, you make some interesting suggestions, such as, for example, taking big public park spaces and actually making them into drive-in movie theaters so that people don't go into a theater, but they can sit in their cars. Are you serious about things like that? Should we be thinking about whether we should change the way we do business over the longer term to try to protect ourselves in the future?
Well, I meant that as a more general point about the shorter term. Right now, people are not staying at home nearly enough, and it's fine to lecture them. I've been doing that too. But you actually need to make staying at home or staying away from mass public gatherings more fun. So I'd love to see some of the streaming services give people free access. If there's any way to put on an abbreviated version of the NBA playoffs in quarantine, I think you'd have millions and millions of people watching it at home. And yes, it's fun, but the point really is to keep people away from being out there spreading the coronavirus.
Is there a prospect, Professor, in your judgment, of there being longer-term, even permanent changes? I mean, as, for example, many of us, including here at Bloomberg, we figure out how to work from home, remote working, telemedicine, things like that. It won't stay that way forever, presumably, but it might not go all the way back to the way it was either.
I think we'll see major long-term adjustments. Look at the aftermath of 9/11. Are we still walking through security scans at the airport? Of course we are. So I think this will be the same, but in fact much more so, with online education, telemedicine, maybe psychological, psychiatric care from a distance, many areas. I think in some ways this will be a spur to longer-term efficiency.
Could it also have an effect on globalization? Globalization already was getting a bad name in some quarters before with some of the trade disputes. At this point, if you're a company, are you going to be a little bit more reluctant to make sure you have really long-distance supply lines?
Supply chains were shortening already. This will accelerate that, and especially for biomedicine, we will end up relying much, much less on China.
When you talk about things like that, does that mean there may be a dampening effect on global growth, and U.S. growth for that matter, for the longer term? Because it's long been thought that things like real globalization and long supply chains were good for growth.
Well, I think there will be a global recession in the short term, almost certainly. That will be bad for global growth. There's nothing we can do to stop that. We're just hoping for the scenario with a better bounce back. And at the margin, we can do things to make that more likely.
And that would be, again, I want to come back and emphasize this, dealing with, for example, small and medium enterprises, some of the small operations that we want to keep going and not have them all go out of business.
And some of the large, like the airlines, they're fairly large companies, but they will be bankrupt fairly soon, odds are. Obviously, no one envisions a future where flying airplanes goes away. So we want to think of what is the right recipe to have not too much interruption. But still, you want equity holders to be taking some real losses there as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. It's really good to have you with us. That is Professor Tyler Cowen of George Mason University, and as I said, we're also fortunate to have him be a Bloomberg Opinion contributor. Coming up, as if a viral epidemic weren't enough, it looks like someone is trying to hack into HHS computers to slow our response. We talk with cybersecurity expert Jamil Jaffer of George Mason University. That is coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
What are you thinking about right now? Well, if you're not thinking about owning a stylish and sophisticated SUV, then this ad will be of absolutely no interest. Nothing. Nada. 0% interest, in fact. But that's exactly what SEAT are offering. 0% APR across our entire SUV range until the 17th of March. So for just £249 deposit and £249 per month, you could drive away an award-winning SEAT Arona. Which, if you think about it, is interesting. Visit seat.co.uk.
With Solutions Personal Contract Plan based on Arona SE technology on 48-month, 10,000 mile per annum agreement with £7,008 optional final payment. Stock vehicles only. Minimum 10% deposit on Taraco. Indemnities may be required. SEAT Financial Services.
At Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. This on a day when the major averages all in the red by 7%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 1,835 points. That's a decline of 7.9%. The S&P 500 is down 198 points. That is down 7.3%. The Nasdaq Composite Index is down 578 points. That's a decline of 7.4%. Now, if you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, from its peak, it's down almost 30% at this point. Volatility continues on the rise. The VIX over 78 right now. All 11 groups in the S&P 500 falling at least 2%. Now, after the Federal Reserve took that emergency action over the weekend to cut rates and continue with repo operations this morning, banks are bearing the brunt of the rout. They are down about 8% as a group right now. You have net interest margins under pressure as those rates continue to go down. That's part of the lifeblood of banks. Bank of America right now, that is down 17.8%. Looking at shares of Apple right now, they're down about 13%. Now, as far as treasuries go, the benchmark 10-year right now, 0.78 is the yield. That is down 17 basis points. The long bond, 1.41%. That is 11 basis points down. NYMEX crude is down $2.41 a barrel, under 30 right now, 29.33. That's a decline of 7.6%. The international benchmark Brent, that is down 11% right now. Let me check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. We continue now with Balance of Power and David Weston.
John Tucker, thank you for that market check, I think. I'm not sure. Live from the Interactive Broker Studio, this is Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Last night, Bloomberg broke the story that hackers had attacked computer systems at the Department of Health and Human Services, apparently in an attempt to slow down the U.S. response to the coronavirus, leading the National Security Council to tweet out that rumors of a national quarantine were false. Welcome now, Jamil Jaffer. He is founder of the National Security Institute at George Mason Law, and he also is former chief counsel at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So welcome back to Bloomberg, Jamil. Really good to have you here today. Take this specific instance here. It's part of a broader problem here of a cyber attack on the HHS right now. They apparently did not get access to information, but they did send out some false information from there. How big a threat is this to our government, particularly at a crisis time like now?
So, David, one of the key things about a crisis response from a government is the desire of the citizenry to have clear information and clear leadership and have confidence that the government is doing what it takes to protect the nation from the threat. And of course, if the HHS website is being hacked, or if their systems are being slowed down or the like, that can have the effect of decaying confidence, and it's likely that the attacker wanted exactly that effect. It's to undermine confidence of Americans and our citizenry in what our government is doing today.
So whether it's public health or whether it's cybersecurity right now, this is the time for us to take fresh stock of what we haven't done, what we should do. You've done a lot of work on that and studied it. What are we not doing to protect systems such as that at HSS?
Well, David, part of the key to protecting these systems is, one, if you're working from home or the like, using a VPN, a virtual private network or the like, but in particular protecting these larger systems, our companies, our intellectual property, what our government is doing and the like. Really, we've got to work together. And what that means is we've got to get into a collective defense posture. That is, companies working with other companies, agencies working with other agencies to collectively defend one another. If we each defend on our own, as we currently do today, going up against big attackers like Iran, Russia, North Korea, China, we're doomed to fail. And so what really is important is bringing together information, creating a common operating picture, and defending collectively.
So is there any movement afoot to have something like that done? I mean, we just saw the president stand up on the public health front to say we're putting together some private companies with the public sector to really address the testing issue. Is there a movement to have something similar done when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, you know, the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, a commission made up of members of Congress, U.S. senators, members of the House, experts from industry and the like, including the CEO of Southern Company, a major energy company, came together last week and released a report arguing for exactly this, the idea of bringing together the public and private sectors together to share information, to create a collaborative system to defend one another and the like, particularly with respect to the most critical entities in our economy. Now, we've been talking about similar efforts for years, and now is the time really to do it. You know, we were waiting for a crisis when it comes to public health to do this. We should have been ahead of this. And now in cyberspace, we can see that potential crisis coming. We got to get ahead of it now and create those sharing mechanisms and collective collaborative defense systems in real time today.
Should, was the word you used, should. But as a practical matter, are we going to be so distracted with the public health crisis that we're not going to be able to get to things such as cybersecurity, which is so important?
No, David, that's a great question, and it's exactly the right question to be asking because, you know, this is exactly what our enemies are going to look for. They're going to look for weakness, right? At a time when we're worried about the public health crisis, our enemies are looking to take advantage. You already see Iran continue to conduct strikes in the Middle East, in Iraq, through their proxy forces of Hezbollah. I expect you'll see more. I expect Russia and China will seek to take advantage of these opportunities, and we need to be prepared to respond to those and create confidence both on that front as well as the public health front. So the U.S. government, in a tough situation right now, has got to step up and do all those things and do them all well.
So, Jamil, you've spent a fair amount of time in Washington, including up with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Where does the leadership need to come from? Does it have to come from the White House? And even within the White House, is it National Security Council? Where do you look for leadership on something like this?
Well, David, I think you have to look right at the top. The White House is where it all starts with the President of the United States. He's got to generate confidence in his leadership and that of the National Security Council and the team around him. Beyond that, members of Congress, the Senate, and the House have to also stand up. They have to be able to back what the President is doing and be able to say effectively that what the President is doing is the right thing to do and that they will back up that plan and provide the funding and the resources necessary to do that. Now, that means they have to come together, and we haven't seen a lot of coming together, frankly, amongst our political parties as well as the branches of government in the last 3-4 years. We've got to see that now in this time of crisis, and it's got to happen both on the public health front and on the cyber front to really protect our nation at this time of emergency.
So this is speculating, and I'm sorry to ask you to speculate, but to what extent do we think that maybe the White House has been a little reluctant to lead on this because it easily gets confused into whether the Russians had something to do with the last election, and that's clearly a sore subject for President Trump. Any suggestion of that really rankles him because I think in fairness to him, he's thinking maybe that's questioning the integrity of my being elected.
Well, I think that's exactly right, David. I think that is how he views it. But the fact of the matter is everyone understands the Russians did come after our elections. They did come after our confidence in our public systems. Nobody can really honestly dispute that. And so we've got to get ahead of that problem. And it's not just the Russians, right?
But also, Jamil, in fairness, I don't think anybody has come up with a compelling case that says that even though they tried to do it, they actually did change the results of the elections. Have they? I don't think anybody's really made that case.
No, David, in fact, that's exactly right. I don't think anybody's made that case because there's not a lot of evidence to support that. Right. What we do know is they sought to undermine confidence in our institutions, and we know they've been successful in doing that. As you can see, the challenges being faced by the Justice Department, the FBI, the intelligence community just demonstrates the lack of sustainability our current institutions have. Now, that being said, there is hope for this, which is to say, we know the Russians are coming after our 2020 elections. We want to defend against it. And, we've got to empower the states to be able to do this. The states are primarily in charge of these elections. We can help them. The federal government can help them to provide information and resources. There's more to be done on that front. We still have some time. Let's not let, this current public health crisis, dissuade us from the fact that there are things to be done in this other realm, and that the government needs our confidence to do that, and the president needs to step up and lead on that front also.
Jamil, you've been working on this for some time now. Are you more hopeful today of real progress in protecting us from cyber attacks today than you were a year ago, or less hopeful?
Well, I'm more hopeful because at the end of the day, what we see happening here with the coronavirus response is everyone understands how important it is that we come together and we join hands, unite in this response, even from the federal government down to the states, down to the localities. I think having seen that happen here with coronavirus, we're going to be better positioned to do that in other areas like cyber. The public and the private sector coming together, working together to find a solution for the American people. I'm hopeful that we'll use this example as a good example of what to do in other realms, whether it's cybersecurity or other realms where the public and private sectors increasingly are coming in closer and closer together.
Okay, Jamil, it's always a treat to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Jamil Jaffer of George Mason University. And coming up on Balance of Power, just as you'd expect, we're going to return to the markets. There is a really global meltdown. And right now, I'm looking at the equity markets. They are down between 7.7 and 8.5%. So they are down. They're not quite as bad as they were at the worst when they had to stop trading, but still well down again today as bonds are on the rise. People are buying bonds. The yields are going down. So we're going to talk with Kriti Gupta. She's our Bloomberg Markets live team reporter. That's coming up next on Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Radio.
Have you ever thought, I wish I...
Night is still young, but a little late to get into the wrong ride, don't you think? That's why I choose Ola. With secure start codes unique to every user, there's no way anyone can ride a car that's meant for you. Good night.
Ride the change with Ola. Download and sign up now. Enjoy no surge pricing until the 12th of April.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
On average, in London, a scooter or motorbike is stolen every hour. Make sure it's not yours. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Apply by the 31st of March for a chance to win your first year in halls. Visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
You're listening to Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Interactive Broker Studio, this is Balance of Power. I am David Weston. Bloomberg Markets live team reporter Kriti Gupta is here now because the markets are moving once again, Kriti, not necessarily in a good way.
Absolutely not. We're seeing major declines. Luckily, though, we've actually paired some of those initial losses. Remember, we did trigger that trading halt earlier this morning. We saw European equities down over 11% on the day. The French stocks really taking a hit this morning. Now, kind of regaining our composure a little bit, but still down pretty heavily.
Yeah, who would have thought we'd have a day where we say we're feeling pretty good about 8 to 9% down in equities?
It's a weird few weeks.
Yeah, no question about it. At the same time, people are buying bonds, as you might expect after what the Fed did yesterday with 100 basis points cut.
That's right, and still kind of hitting on that liquidity pattern we've been talking about forever. Fed Chairman Powell addressed that last night, really, that the Treasury market should not be trading the way equities and corporate bond markets do. This is not the moves you're seeing is not normal.
Well, and I keep looking at gold, which is selling off. Normally you'd think this is a rush to safety, let's go into gold, but they're not, maybe because they have to get some cash.
That's right. The haven bid is not so much a haven anymore. It kind of seems like cash is the new haven, really. Gold, especially on those margin calls, you're seeing people who are kind of having to cut their positions to make up for the losses they're seeing in the stock market and in other asset classes, and that's really what's driving the action, which is really interesting because gold is not losing its value in theory Whereas the other asset classes, you're seeing value really just disappear before our eyes.
And the question I think everyone is asking right now is what comes next? I mean, first and foremost, with the virus itself, how bad is it going to get? How fast will it grow? When will it flatten out? But what comes next in terms of the economy? And we had maybe a glimmer of what that might mean from China.
That's right. Let's kick it off with first, like the extent of the virus, because first, a few weeks ago when this first, or excuse me, a few months ago, at the beginning of the year when this really took off in China, the expectation was that this is a Chinese issue. This is not coming to the rest of the world. This is an isolated incident. They'll rebound. Everything will be back to normal. It was
how'd
not
that work
priced.
out?
Right. It wasn't priced into the market, and now it's very painfully priced into the market. Let's go ahead to this Chinese data, though. We really saw some kind of scary numbers come out last night. What's crucial here is that they're actually coming back. They're starting again. This is a decent glimpse of what may be awaiting the U.S. economy, except I hate to say this, it may be even worse because the U.S., after all, is the largest consuming economy in the world.
And also, a lot of the U.S. economy is based on services and face-to-face in a way, more than China is. And there is some argument that, in fact, it may take more of a chunk out of what we're doing than it did out of China, actually.
That's right. And arguably, you could also say, let's just go back to the demand side really quickly. China could even get a further hit as the largest consumer economy really takes a big piece out of the largest export economy in the world. You could see some further falls there.
Yeah, and then we won't even mention Europe because, people seem to just be resigned to the fact we're going to have a recession in Europe.
That's right. But you know what's interesting about Europe, and this is actually something I was talking to someone about just before I hopped on air here. European stocks are very cheap right now just because they've been so beaten up and battered for a little bit now. And so you're actually seeing some buying in European stocks because they actually offer dividends just for holding the stock, which is an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, in the worst cases, count on reversion to the mean. It can get too bad and come back. That's true on the upside. It's true on the downside as well. So we may be at that point where we're just hoping for a reversion to the mean somewhere, somehow.
Yeah, it seems like across the world, we just need a fresh start. That's what'll get us out of this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one thing that's clear is that the Fed won't get us out of it, given the reaction to the 100 basis point cut yesterday.
You know what's interesting about that? We were waiting for kind of a big response in a big way. We needed the Fed to shock the market. They did it with that 50 basis point cut, and then they topped it with last night's decision.
Yeah, exactly. They certainly did that. Okay. Thank you so much, Kriti. It's great to have Bloomberg Markets live team reporter Kriti Gupta with us to give us a review of the markets, which are down, as we have said. That's going to do it for Balance of Power for today. I'm David Weston, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury in the age of coronavirus. The show mustn't go on, at least until April 12th, according to the Broadway League. Not since September 11th, Hurricane Sandy and one really bad blizzard has the Great White Way gone dark. Yet Broadway is the latest domino to fall as escalating coronavirus cases led to bans of all gatherings over 500 people in New York State. In fact, the live music industry shut down for the foreseeable future as well, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, and not just Coachella. Live Nation, the world's largest concert promoter with an annual gross of $3.8 billion, has postponed all large concerts through the end of the month. One bright side of business, private jet operators in Europe are seeing a huge uptick in inquiries as Trump's European travel ban takes effect. The cost to charter a long-range jet, such as a Bombardier Global to New York from Paris, is about $90,000, according to Private Fly. Visit BloombergPursuits.com for more. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrow enjoy each other's company.
Most of us don't speak Mandarin. John, do you speak Mandarin?
I do not speak Mandarin.
I just wanted to check that.
Almost as much as they enjoy grilling economic experts.
When this is over, do you bounce back or is there a lasting weakness to it?
Which means that you will enjoy listening.
If things get worse, we're ready to do more.
Bloomberg Surveillance, weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hope you enjoyed your meal. And I just want to say, he's lucky to have a brother like you.
Lucky? Caring for my brother is far from easy. But he's a part of me, like my arms and legs, so I'll be his. No time for tired. Nothing can disable this love. He needs me, but I'm the lucky one, even though I need help now and then.
If you're caring for a loved one, visit aarp.org/caregiving for care guides and community. Support for your strength. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here.
Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York, I'm Doug Krisner, 10 a.m. Wall Street time. I'm sorry about that. Let me check my clock again. No, it is 1 p.m. Wall Street time. Was looking at the West Coast clock there for a moment. You'll have to excuse me. We're seeing a very hyper-aggressive move out of risk assets with the Dow down about 9% right now. Markets struggling to discount a worsening economic toll from the outbreak of the coronavirus. Obviously, overnight we had the Fed and other central banks dramatically stepping up efforts to stabilize markets and deal with this issue of liquidity. The Fed reducing that benchmark rate by a full percentage point to near zero. The Fed also pledging a bigger balance sheet and boosting bond holdings by about $700 billion. In the broader market right now, S&P 500 down more than 8%. We had been at one point weaker by 11% earlier. Right out of the gate today, we triggered those circuit breakers with a plunge in the S&P 500 of 8%. The S&P 1500 apparel retail group having its worst day on record right now, a loss of 17%. A handful of U.S. retailers announcing they will temporarily shut their stores to prevent the spread of the virus. And Roche is saying that the coronavirus tests manufactured by the company are now available in U.S. labs. The stock is up about 3% right now. In terms of bond market action, we are down 18 basis points on the U.S. 10-year Treasury, 77 basis points on the 10-year. Let's get an update on American depository receipts. Dave Wilson is here for that. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Doug. Yeah, it's a similar story with the ADRs. They are definitely falling along with U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is down 8.8%. And the S&P 500 is lower by 8.3%. Now, European banks' ADRs have tumbled along with the shares of U.S. peers. They're lower after the Federal Reserve cut its benchmark interest rate to near zero and said it would buy $700 billion of Treasury and mortgage bonds. The UK's Barclays has fallen almost 20% in U.S. trading. France's Societe Generale has lost 21.5%. And Spain's Santander has dropped 17.5%. The UK's IAG has plunged 32%. The owner of British Airways and Spanish airline Iberia said it will slash April and May capacity by at least 75% from a year ago. This in response to the coronavirus. France's Renault has fallen about 17%. The automaker halted production at all of its French factories, according to Agence France Presse. And earlier, AFP reports said Renault's 4 plants in Spain were suspended. Now, Germany's Adidas, also known as Adidas, was actually higher earlier today. It's down 0.2% at the moment. The athletic wear maker was raised the equivalent of buy from hold securities firm Exane. Now, Adidas's ADRs tumbled last week by about 29%. The biggest drop since trading began in 2005, Doug.
All right, thanks to Dave Wilson. Transport fuel prices are crashing as WTI crude oil now is below $30 a barrel. We're at $29.15. U.S. gasoline futures down 21%. We also see diesel and jet fuel markets plunging given the collapse in consumption. For all our latest coverage on COVID-19, you can head to Bloomberg.com/coronavirus. That is the Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
We have the strong
strongest economy by far in the world.
We need an economy that works for everybody.
I am the one who has the broadest coalition.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
They've got the money they need to run a very competitive race.
These lawyers brought the case, and in my view, they should be sanctioned.
We want certainty in the markets. We want certainty in our trading relationships.
The administration is trying to create a new divided world.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to the second hour of Balance of Power. I'm June Grosso. Ahead, for the first time in perhaps a century, the Supreme Court is postponing an argument session due to the coronavirus pandemic. Expect a surge in lawsuits over force majeure clauses. Could the government use lockdowns to slow the coronavirus? And President Trump's victory over congressional oversight is now in doubt. The Supreme Court is postponing a 2-week argument session that had been set to start next week that includes blockbuster cases over Trump's financial records and an $8 billion copyright clash between Google and Oracle. Joining me is Greg Storr, Bloomberg News Supreme Court reporter. So, Greg, this was a very lawyerly announcement with the court citing precedent for the postponement. Tell us about it.
Yeah, the precedent was back during the Spanish flu when the court postponed arguments for several weeks. And then they also mentioned a couple earlier occasions when, back in the 18th century, when the court delayed arguments as well. As best we can tell, it is the first time in about a century since the Spanish flu that the court has had to delay arguments because of a public health scare.
So 6 of the 9 justices are 65 or older, while 2 are in their 80s. So they're in the category recommended to stay home, avoid social interaction. But the court said other business will proceed as scheduled?
Yeah, they're clearly trying to do what they can. They have a private conference that's scheduled for this Friday that's going to go forward, but they said that some justices may take part in that through telephone. And they plan on issuing orders, which could include some new cases they're taking up next Monday. And they didn't make any announcement about other things like opinions and the next argument session in April, trying to apparently keep their options open for those. Court trying to do as much business as it can.
So usually it's the last week of June that we get that flurry of opinions. Can the court still keep to that schedule, or might it have to extend the session into the summer?
You know, we're getting into speculation, but my guess is that there's a good chance that they will extend it into the summer. You know, they're always very busy this time of year for the next few months, as it is, especially if they're going to keep trying to hear arguments in the couple dozen cases that had been scheduled for March and in April, or maybe a little less than a couple dozen, about 20 cases total. If they're going to do that, they're going to have an awful lot to do, and we're going to be talking into the summer. And of course, there's no guarantee they'll be able to hear arguments in April either, so we may be talking about pushing things well into the summer.
So we've talked about this term many times being a blockbuster term. What are some of the arguments that are being postponed?
Well, you mentioned this big copyright case between Google and Oracle. That's potentially an $8 billion case that was going to be argued next week. That's being put off. The following week, the court was going to hear cases involving these subpoenas for Donald Trump's financial records. The subpoenas came from several House committees and a New York grand jury. They went to his banks and his accounting firm. That's being put off as well. And then, potentially in April, if they have to put off those arguments too, we have cases over faithless electors who try to cast votes for somebody other than who their state voted for in the presidential election. Big case involving contraceptive coverage and a religious opt-out. And then, of course, there are all the cases that are already argued that they're going to have to issue opinions in as well.
Would it be difficult for them to issue opinions if they're not in the same building, or is that all done, over the internet?
Well, they do a lot of their work actually by physical paper internally. They do a lot of passing around, draft opinions by hand delivery from one office to another. In terms of actually issuing the opinions, once they're able to put them together, normally or traditionally the court issues opinions by taking the bench. We know they're not going to take the bench in March. We don't know whether they might change their procedure and just issue opinions electronically without announcing them from the bench. You have to. I would be very surprised if the court didn't go ahead and rule in all those cases that they've heard arguments in, even if they can't actually take the bench to announce them.
Because lawyers still like paper.
They just like paper, and this is a court, June, that doesn't, they don't allow live streaming of their arguments. No cameras in there. They're not really set up. They don't like to do things other than in person, the way they've been doing things for decades and centuries.
Now, in light of, the new changes that might be ahead, the Supreme Court closing its doors, and there was talk that perhaps they would have future oral arguments during this period without an audience there. But that led civil rights groups and progressive groups to call for them to broadcast, to live stream their arguments. And you can tell us how they've been how receptive they've been to that in the past.
Yeah, they've been very unreceptive to that in the past. Groups have been calling for the court to do that, only, even when the court is open. At very most, 500 people could fit in that courtroom, and that's with a lot of people barely being able to see. So outside groups for a long time have been saying, give us audio access, video access. It's something that the justices keep saying, we're afraid that this system works well for us, and we're afraid of changing things that it might not work as well for us. But no doubt that's something that they're at least going to be thinking about. Whether they actually make changes this spring remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, they do have the transcripts that come out that day, but the oral arguments don't come out till the end of the week, and it really makes a difference when you hear the argument. It really does.
Yeah, and right now the system we have is folks like me get to go up there, watch the argument, and come down and try to report on what we've seen and heard up there. And the vast majority of people don't get the firsthand access they would love to get until, as you say, the audio comes out at the end of the week. I would not imagine the court would do anything like allow cameras in there, but doing something where they release the audio more quickly, I would think that's at least something that's on the table for them now.
All right, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Thanks so much, Greg. That's Bloomberg News Supreme Court reporter Greg Storr. Coming up, we're going to be talking about expecting a surge of lawsuits over the force majeure clauses. Those are the clauses that people know as sort of the act of God clauses, where you're excused from performance under a contract. But what excuse do you need? And would this pandemic be that excuse? We'll find out. This is Bloomberg. I'm June Grosso.
If you promise to cover the latest financial and business news from Asia,
we're talking about social enterprises in Asian countries
with expert analysts who really understand Asia.
Aren't you encouraged with respect to U.S.-China trade?
Then you must be us.
Tell us about the trend within this part of the world.
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
What sort of fiscal stimulus do you think will...
At 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
To buy your home, you became a house-hunting ace, learned about loans, scoured neighborhoods, and asked the right questions. Now you're queen of your castle. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll feel empowered to own your retirement like you own your home. Go to aceyourretirement.org. Because when it comes to clearing financial hurdles, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
What if you could keep the top economic experts in a conference room next to your office without having to feed them?
Do we need better optics? Do we need some substance? Do CEOs care about ESG?
We have seen quite a lot of stimulus pumped into the system already.
It's the biggest warning yet about the financial risks of climate change.
Now there are more ways to hear us. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and at BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hi, everyone. Al Roker here. As a guy with his own catchphrase, I appreciate that after 75 years, Smokey's only said,
"Only you can prevent wildfires."
But I'm filling in because there's a lot more to report. Like when it's dry or windy. Be careful burning yard waste, because wildfires can even start in your neck of the woods. Go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving
Night
night is still young, but a little late to get into the wrong ride, don't you think? That's why I choose Ola. With secure start codes unique to every user, there's no way anyone can ride a car that's meant for you. Good night.
Ride the change with Ola. Download and sign up now. Enjoy no surge pricing until the 12th of April.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL. Every journey matters.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Apply by the 31st of March for a chance to win your first year in halls. Visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
Hey, love. Who's this lot?
Oh, they arrived with our new BT TV box.
Right.
That's the Night's Watch, Marcus Rashford, and Catherine the Great.
Who's hiding behind the curtain?
Shh, that's Jack Ryan. Don't blow his cover.
New BT TV, the new home for all the channels you love, including Sky Atlantic, Sky Cinema, Sky Sports from Now TV, Prime Video and BT Sport. Watch TV like never before. BT, beyond limits.
New customers, BT TV available with BT Superfast Fibre, 24-month terms apply.
Heroes. They're the ones we look up to, or sometimes down at, if they're under your sink, mending a broken pipe. Whether it's plumbing to plastering, heating to electrics, at Local Heroes, every job completed by an expert tradesperson comes with a 12-month British Gas guarantee when you pay online. So, if it needs fixing, there's a local hero for that. To get a quote, search Local Heroes. Terms and conditions apply.
How do you channel your inner calm? Meditation? Yoga? Or within the sanctuary of your Citroën C3 with 11 driving aids and wide, comfortable seats? Calm really does come from within. Citroën C3, now £199 per month with an initial rental of £199 and £500 of list price.
Citroën.
Citroën UK Limited, a credit broker, not a lender. Personal lease, you will not own the vehicle. Offer on field PureTech 83 manual. 6,000 miles per annum. Guarantee may be required. Terms, eligibility criteria and return conditions apply. PSA Finance UK Limited. Participating dealer stock vehicles ordered between 1st and 22nd and registered by March 31st.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
You're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that
Skip, you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
Are you curious what others are listening to on TuneIn? Head to the trending section under Browse to see the most popular stations and podcasts among TuneIn listeners right now. Check it out. You might just discover something new for yourself.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
At 17 past the hour, let's get you caught up on market action right now. A hyper-aggressive move out of risk assets today, given the worsening economic outlook now as a result of the coronavirus outbreak. The Dow Industrial Average off session lows, but nonetheless, we are down by 8.3%. Obviously, we had central banks taking dramatic steps yesterday to stabilize capital markets and address the issue of liquidity. The Fed, right at the top of the list, reducing that benchmark interest rate by a full percentage point all the way down to zero. The Fed also pledging a bigger balance sheet, boosting bond holdings by a whopping $700 billion. Right now, if you look at the bond market, 10-year Treasury down nearly 20 basis points in yield. We are at 76 basis points on the 10-year. The dollar firm against the majors with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index rising 0.2%. We're seeing a rally into the Japanese yen against the greenback, up by 1.8% at 105.76. Earlier today, the International Monetary Fund pledged to mobilize its $1 trillion lending capacity to try to stem the negative impact of the coronavirus. We also have financial stocks being hard hit today. 8 banks in the U.S. are suspending their share buybacks and saying they will focus instead on supporting clients during this pandemic. The KBW Bank Index down the most since 2009. We are off about 13% at this hour. That is markets and your Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Doug Krisner.
Thank you, Doug. One of the fallouts from the coronavirus for business will be lawsuits over the disruptions, whether it's stores suing manufacturers over missed deadlines, manufacturers suing suppliers for the same reason, and countless other reasons. You can expect to see a surge in disputes over whether force majeure clauses apply to the outbreak. Joining me is Christopher Kircher, a partner at Quinn Emanuel. Chris, tell us about the force majeure clause. What is it?
Of course. Thanks for having me, June. So a force majeure clause is a clause in certain contracts that provides that a party may be excused from performing its end of the contract if there's an unforeseen circumstance, something like an act of God.
So do most business contracts have these clauses, and do they vary? Are some stricter, more restrictive than others?
Yeah, that's a great question, June. Most business contracts do. Certainly contracts that were negotiated by sophisticated parties, and especially as the contracts concern activities in commerce and increasing dollars, you tend to see these provisions. But they do vary from contract to contract, and courts tend to construe them very narrowly. Courts don't like to let parties out of performance simply by citing one of these unforeseen circumstances. They want to make sure that it's captured within the categories of the types of events that the contract provides for.
So in this case, where no one ever heard of the coronavirus until a few months ago, and where the World Health Organization has upgraded the outbreak to a pandemic, does that qualify as an act of God?
That's a great question. It didn't even exist until a few months ago, right? So, certainly for contracts that were entered into before this thing ever existed, parties will have an argument that it may apply. It may be more difficult for contracts that parties have entered into since we started seeing an outbreak in China and concerns about this, and certainly as concern has grown over time. But even if you had a contract in a force majeure provision that includes pandemics or a category including pandemics drafted before the outbreak, you still need to show that your performance is impossible or something close to it. So it's not enough simply to say, well, this happened, we didn't expect this, so we're pulling out of the contract. You need to really drill down on what the contract terms say, and two, how is it that this event has actually impeded your performance?
So can you tell us some of the cases, perhaps from the avian flu outbreak in 2015, to give us an example?
Yeah, sure. And that's a great example. You typically see this come after things like hurricanes, previous pandemics, even things like war or 9/11. In the avian flu outbreak, there are cases, for example, a case where a poultry farmer had contracted to purchase some new equipment for their poultry farm. And because of the avian flu outbreak, there wasn't going to be a poultry manufacturing that year. But nevertheless, the court said, well, you're the buyer of this equipment. And under the reading of this contract, it only excuses it if the avian flu actually prevents your performance. Since you're the buyer and the seller can deliver the equipment, you're not excused. Now, in that case, there are other ways that you can look at to get out of the contract potentially, or at least mitigate the damages, but force majeure was not one of them.
So give us an example of a case, if you know, where the force majeure clause was enforced.
Sure. Well, in any case where, take an example where you have a hurricane and the government closes a port and a party is supposed to deliver to that port. And you have a force majeure clause that covers hurricanes and, performance is truly rendered impossible. In those cases, you're likely to see courts excuse parties from delivering because it's impossible. The government has absolutely prohibited the actions that would be necessary for performance.
When you are negotiating a contract, are the force majeure clauses and, how they're written and the extent of them, is that a heavily negotiated term of the contract, or is it just something that people don't expect to happen?
Yeah, that's an important question, June. I expect that going forward, you'll see a lot more focus on this in all types of contracts, but it's not necessarily something that parties really have focused on in every situation. In large project, construction, engineering, and large trade deals, you do see parties negotiate these things carefully. In other instances, like events, you typically have a force majeure provision where someone might be throwing a large event, and contracting parties may include a force majeure provision in there. But it's not in every contract, and they're not always particularly carefully negotiated because it's the nature of the beast. Parties aren't necessarily expecting this to become a real issue.
Well, now we probably will see a lot of them, especially with just today, the governors of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut ordered all bars and restaurants to be closed. So we shall see. Thank you so much, Christopher. That's Christopher Kircher, a partner at Quinn Emanuel. Coming up, we're going to be talking about Trump's latest victory over the congressional oversight is in doubt. That's the victory where an appellate court, refused to enforce a subpoena by Congress for former White House counsel Don McGahn's testimony. So we're going to look at what's going to happen in that case now with an en banc panel hearing it. I'm June Grosso. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are plunging over 8% on coronavirus concerns. The Dow is falling over 2,000 points. S&P 500 and NASDAQ dropping 8.5%. Goldman Sachs is now saying the U.S. economy will contract sharply in late March and April as consumers and businesses slash spending, with the short downturn likely be officially deemed a recession. They see no U.S. growth in this current quarter, and they cut their full-year growth forecast to 1.4%. Many airlines are technically bankrupt, even if they haven't officially filed. That's according to the Center for Aviation. Most airlines worldwide will be filing for bankruptcy by the end of May. Reuters is reporting that the White House is drafting a financial assistance package for airlines that's expected to include direct assistance. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
The Bloomberg Business of Sports podcast. How did the Yankees become this mega valuable team? Where the money is flowing inside sports around the globe.
From the marketing perspective, where are the dollars spent?
From union heads to team owners, Scott Soshnick and Michael Barr speak to the names that power this multi-billion-dollar industry. Boston Red Sox CEO Sam Kennedy.
National Hockey League Commissioner Gary Bettman.
Bloomberg Business of Sports. Listen today on Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Are you interested?
Yo, look at this, look at this. What do you reckon? Should I swipe right? Yo, check this out, check this out, check this out. Yo, bro. Hey, look at this. Yo, look at this, look at this. Should I swipe right? Hey, look at this, look at this. Yo, bro, check this out, check this out. Should I swipe right? Check this out. Look, I'm vomiting rainbows.
Oi, get your phone out my face. I'm trying to drive.
Sorry, mate. Your mate's more likely to crash with passengers in the car. So don't drive him to distraction. Let a mate concentrate.
Right now at TradePoint, get 4 for 3 on a huge range of laminate flooring and tiles. Plus, if you've loyalty discount, you'll get this on top. So for a great deal on flooring and tiles, get to TradePoint. The value of every 4th item per single transaction in descending price order will be deducted. Offer ends 30th of March, subject to availability. See tradepoint.co.uk.
Heroes. They're the ones we turn to in our darkest hour. Like when you blow a fuse and the lights go off. Whether it's electrics to heating, plumbing to plastering, at Local Heroes, every job completed by an expert tradesperson comes with a 12-month British Gas guarantee when you pay online. So, if it needs fixing, there's a Local Hero for that. To get a quote, search Local Heroes. Terms and conditions apply.
On this week's On the Media, the president thought he could defeat the narrative of COVID-19 with his usual tactic of, quote, censorship through noise. But the virus is proving resistant.
People's lives are going to be disrupted on a daily basis, and as that happens, the alternate reality he's created is inevitably going to implode.
Catch On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC Studios on TuneIn today.
Are you curious what others are listening to on TuneIn? Head to the trending section under Browse to see the most popular stations and podcasts among TuneIn listeners right now. Check it out. You might just discover something new for yourself.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league, to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
You're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that.
Skip, you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong. Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
How should investors be positioning?
We go there.
Let's talk about export numbers because they've been quite shocking. Korea, we saw Singapore, Japan too.
Tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
I'm June Grosso. Coming up in the next half hour of Balance of Power, Could the government use lockdowns to slow the coronavirus? And President Trump's victory over congressional oversight is now in doubt. But first, let's go to Doug Krisner for a look at the markets. Doug.
Hey, June. I want to begin with American Airlines and United Airlines. Both of those stocks have been halted for volatility. We are being told the U.S. industry the airline industry is seeking grants and loans totaling as much as $58 billion from the federal government, as well as temporary relief from various taxes. Now, at the last check, American shares were up 2.2%. However, UAL, United Airlines, down 14%. Obviously, there has been the dramatic negative impact of travel restrictions, which has been just decimating the airline industry writ large. Earlier today, the Bloomberg World Airline Index was down 8%. Generally speaking, in the equity market, we remain on the back foot quite substantially. This hyper-aggressive move out of risk assets, the Dow down more than 9% right now, S&P 500 weaker by about 9%, similar decline for the NASDAQ composite. It seems as the efforts made by central banks to step up and stabilize capital markets and liquidity really is not capturing the imagination of the market. Yes, it was last night that the Fed made that emergency move and reduced the benchmark rate by a full percentage point. It also pledged to expand the balance sheet, boosting bond holdings by about $700 billion. We also had today from the IMF a pledge to mobilize its $1 trillion lending capacity. That seems to have had little impact as well. Financial shares, as you might expect, being very hard hit. The KBW Bank Index down nearly 13% right now, and transport fuel prices crashing. WTI crude oil at $29 a nickel a barrel. We also have gasoline futures down by 21%. Diesel and jet fuel plunging as well, given the collapse in consumption. U.S. 10-year Treasury right now with a yield of 73 basis points. For our latest coverage on COVID-19, you can head to Bloomberg.com/coronavirus. If you're our terminal customer, head to VRUS Go. June, back to you.
Thank you, Doug. Well, President Trump's victory over congressional oversight is in doubt. The D.C. Court of Appeals has set aside a decision by a panel of judges dismissing a House lawsuit for the testimony of a former White House counsel, Don McGahn. It's going to rehear the case en banc with a full panel of judges. Joining me is Bloomberg legal reporter Eric Larson. Eric, tell us about Friday's order and the prior decision.
Well, the order came down fairly late on Friday. I think maybe a lot of people sort of didn't notice it, but it was actually pretty significant. They decided that all of the judges who were part of this appeals court voted to rehear the whole case. It was originally heard by a panel of 3 justices, and they ruled in favor of the Trump administration on ideological lines 2-1. But now all of the judges who make up this circuit have decided to rehear the case. Except for two of the justices who were appointed by Trump decided to recuse themselves. They didn't give an explanation, but they won't be part of the rehearing. So they're going to reconsider whether or not the right decision was made to dismiss this lawsuit and prevent the testimony from this former White House counsel, Don McGahn.
So does calling for an en banc hearing suggest that the judges will reverse that prior ruling?
The experts that we have spoken to say yes, that generally, when they decide to rehear something like this, that there's a good reason to believe they're at least considering reversing it. They want to hear again these arguments, and they want a broader a panel of judges to make this decision. We spoke with several experts on Friday who said flat out that they thought this is a very good sign that the decision would be reversed, especially since it's such a consequential decision that was made.
Also, the composition of that appeals court, especially with the 2 Trump appointees who are who are recusing themselves, doesn't bode well for the Trump administration.
Exactly. As we've seen in so many cases involving the Trump administration, a lot of these decisions are coming down on ideological lines, and this, if this is one of them, then the Democrats' appointed judges would certainly outweigh the Republicans. So it definitely does not look good for Trump on this one, just based on that information. And we may not find out right away. The rehearing was scheduled for April 28th, and with the virus crisis, it's unsure if that'll actually end up happening. And, of course, any decision on that would probably get appealed to the Supreme Court as well.
So did the D.C. Circuit Court close all hearings for the foreseeable future? Are they one of the federal courts that did that?
They haven't, at least not as far as I've seen, but it just seems like that has been the trend. And we saw what happened with the Supreme Court today, holding off on their hearing. So it wouldn't be surprising if that did happen with the appeals court here as well. But if they do go ahead, it is scheduled for April 28th for now.
Another factor here might have been, Eric, that the decision on McGahn seemed to be in conflict with a decision by another panel of the same court just 11 days later, which ruled that the Justice Department had to release secret grand jury evidence from special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. And the judge who wrote the majority opinion in the Mueller case was in the dissent in the McGahn case.
Right, and you can see why there seems to be such a live issue with a big disagreement over it. And as we saw after Trump's initial victory in the McGahn case, his legal team, the Justice Department, very quickly started filing notices in several other high-profile cases saying, hey, we won this case over the Don McGahn testimony, and therefore these other cases should be dismissed as well, including the lawsuit over the House looking into Trump's tax returns and his finances, even a lawsuit over the Trump administration's diversion of military funds to the border wall, and even the House's lawsuit trying to find out what happened with that attempt to get a citizenship question on the 2020 census. All of these cases Trump was arguing should be dismissed as a result of this McGahn ruling. So you can see how many other cases it will impact.
And I wonder also, we have the case that's now, the oral arguments have now been put off by the Supreme Court, but it's supposed to be at the end of the month, they're going to hear arguments about the business records of President Trump, 3 cases on that. But I wonder if their decision there might impact what the D.C. Circuit would do here.
I mean, that is possible. I honestly don't know. I suppose it depends on how which of these hearings ends up happening first. But we do know that clearly a lot of people on both sides of the aisle are paying such very close attention to what happens here. There was a brief that was filed in this McGahn case asking for this rehearing, where 100 former members of Congress and former executive branch officials, all from both sides of the aisle, said that this case needed to be reheard, that it was just going too far to prevent this kind of House oversight.
Because the decision said that they couldn't legislate. They didn't want to interfere between the executive and the legislative branches, so that sort of left nothing to be done.
Correct. That's correct. The judges said in this ruling that's now in doubt that it just isn't up to a judge to resolve the dispute between the legislative and the executive branch. But as these former members of Congress and officials said in this letter, what else are they supposed to do? They have a congressional authority to issue subpoenas like this, but if they can't back them up, then how are they supposed to investigate potential wrongdoing or abuses of power? And, they even said in this brief that was filed by this group that all that would be left to them perhaps to do would be to have the sergeant-in-arms try to arrest someone for refusing to respond to a subpoena. And they even said in this filing, that could lead to a constitutional crisis. It could even lead to violence between the sergeant-at-arms and the executive branch, officers. So it was a very shocking brief that they filed.
Thanks so much, Eric. That's Bloomberg News legal reporter Eric Larson. Coming up, we're going to be talking about, could the government use lockdowns as they have in Italy and China to slow the coronavirus, or would that violate your constitutional rights? I'm June Grasso, and this is Bloomberg.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at Babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
In-depth analysis.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL. Every journey matters.
At the Bank of Santander, they've created Stan, a smart bot that can predict the future of remortgaging.
All right, Stan, will my mortgage rate go up?
1955 was the last time Newcastle won the cup.
No, and try not to mumble.
Playing, let's get ready to rumble.
Oh.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they can't predict your future, but they'll help secure it with great mortgage rates fixed for up to 10 years. See what's possible at Santander.
Early repayment charges apply. Lending subject to status and criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Hi, do you have a table for 4 tonight? Right. I see. Completely booked out. Yeah, since February.
Forgot to book a table for Mother's Day. That deserves your favourite food delivered. Like Santa Maria Pizzeria, Sir Geister Bros, or German Doner Kebab. With delivery you can track right to your door in London. That deserves Deliveroo. Download the app today. Geographical restrictions apply, subject to terms and conditions.
How do you channel your inner calm? Meditation? Yoga? Or within the sanctuary of your Citroën C3 with 11 driving aids and wide, comfortable seats? Calm really does come from within. Citroën C3, now £199 per month with an initial rental of £199 and £500 of list price.
Citroën.
Citroën UK Limited, a credit broker, not a lender. Personal lease will not own the vehicle. Offer on field PureTech 83 manual. 6,000 miles per annum. Guarantee may be required. Terms, eligibility criteria and return conditions apply. PSA Finance UK Limited. Participating dealer stock vehicles ordered between 1st and 22nd and registered by March 31st.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league, to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
Yeah, but you're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that
Skip,
yet.
you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
We're seeing a hyper-aggressive move out of risk assets today, given a deteriorating economic outlook as a result of the coronavirus epidemic. It looks like the market's really not taking much comfort in the extraordinary measures taken last night by the Fed to cut that benchmark interest rate a full percentage point to nearly zero. The Fed also pledging a bigger balance sheet. It will boost bond buying by about $700 billion. One of the things that we're seeing right now, airlines getting whipsawed. American shares up more than 4% right now, and UAL, the parent of United Airlines, down about 9%, but the stock is well off the worst levels of the day. Earlier, both American and United were halted for a lot of volatility on word the industry is now seeking grants and loans totaling as much as $58 billion from the federal government as a way of getting temporary relief. Also, perhaps some temporary relief from taxes. Dow Industrial Average down 9% right now. S&P 500 weaker by about 8.8%. Similar decline for the NASDAQ Composite. Financials, as you might expect, being hard hit. We've got a contraction in long-term interest rates with the 10-year Treasury down 21 basis points, now yielding 74 basis points. The KBW Bank Index down about 13% right now. Berkshire Hathaway Energy and Duke Energy are among more than 30 U.S. power and energy companies in talks with banks to discuss raising new financing or drawing down on their existing loan facilities. Right now, we've got the stronger dollar against the majors with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up 0.2% and the yen strengthening against the greenback by 1.7% to 105.79. That's a look at markets. Back to Balance of Power with June Grasso.
Thank you, Doug. Unprecedented government restrictions are being placed on public gatherings and personal behavior in the face of the coronavirus epidemic. How far can social distancing measures go in the U.S.? Italy has turned toward the shutdown of travel for its entire population of 60 million people in what's been referred to as a lockdown. Could that happen in the U.S. without legal consequences? Joining me is Lindsay Wiley, a health law professor at the Washington College of Law. So, Lindsay, could the government order all citizens, let's say in New York State, to stay inside?
I think that would be absolutely unprecedented, and it would be closely scrutinized by the courts. If there were an order for everyone to stay inside for a significant period of time. New Jersey has imposed a curfew tonight from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., and that's the first significant mandatory step restricting personal behavior on a mandatory basis that we've seen. It's possible, though, that could be short-term. There's a lot of concern about preventing large gatherings to celebrate St. Patrick's Day in spite of bars being closed. That's certainly something to watch, though.
And I heard Governor Cuomo say, when asked a question about curfews, that the word makes him nervous, probably because he's a lawyer. So tell me, but curfews have been enforced. How do the courts weigh the pros and the cons, or what's the weighing done about curfews?
Yeah, I think an important point here is that our constitutional rights are not suspended in an emergency, but they're also not absolute. So just like in any kind of routine circumstances, individual rights are balanced against compelling interest in protecting the public's health and safety. So draconian restrictions on personal liberty, a long-term curfew, domestic travel restrictions, any kind of closed borders or road closures that would affect Americans' ability to move from place to place or come outside of their homes would be very closely scrutinized. Really every aspect of this would be closely examined, including the geographic scope, the time that would be encompassed, how long they would be in effect, as well as any exceptions that would be made and who would be making those decisions and how. Because those matters of implementation are going to be scrutinized in terms of their impact on due process rights and equal protection rights.
So let's talk about curfew for just a minute. Suppose you violate a curfew. Can they fine you? Can they take you to jail? What can they do?
I think, obviously the hope here is for voluntary compliance. I think that's true in any public health situation. Voluntary compliance is just more effective because it helps maintain the public's trust. But if you have a rowdy crowd out celebrating St. Patrick's and it becomes large enough to be a concern from a public health standpoint about transmission, you could certainly see health officials asking local police to help ask people to head home. You could see that turning into a confrontation, especially if there's alcohol involved. And in that case, there could be problems in terms of failing to comply with a valid police order.
I know there's no clear line, but what would you say is sort of the fuzzy line between curfew and the next step?
I think you'd have to explain what the next step is.
I'm trying to figure that out because
yeah, I think a really clear line in my mind here is between the kinds of social distancing that involve closing facilities or orders against businesses like bars and restaurants and large venues to close, or maybe even retail stores that are non-essential. That's something that we've seen happening in Spain and some other countries. That's one matter. From a constitutional standpoint, those orders against businesses don't raise nearly the same concerns as orders against people to stay indoors or to not travel across particular lines. So I think that's the line that's particularly important to watch, and that's probably the line that de Blasio has in mind when he says he wants to be cautious about thinking in terms of curfew.
Now, the American Civil Liberties Union said in a statement that, quote, the use of emergency powers in this pandemic can be legitimate for measures grounded in science and public health, but added that it would be watching closely to make sure those powers were not abused. So in what situation could you see the ACLU stepping in and suing?
I think if this curfew in New Jersey turns out to be more than a short-term imposition, really surrounding this particular holiday where there's potential for large gatherings, I could see ACLU stepping in if it were imposed for a matter of weeks. Certainly if restrictions went beyond a nightly curfew and went to the level that we've seen in some other countries where the instructions are to stay indoors at all times, I would hope that would be challenged. And that's not to say that it couldn't be acceptable under any circumstances, but we need to be really careful to make sure that authorities who are issuing these orders are held to that constitutional standard of strong scientific evidence that it's the right thing to do, that it's going to work, that the benefits outweigh the risks in terms of people's health if they're restricted, if their movements are restricted, as well as their liberties.
This is such a novel circumstance, and the evidence is so much in question that it seems as if the authorities might, in the courts at least, have a leg up that way because so much is unknown.
I think the real difficulty about how much is unknown here is that because we haven't had mass testing on any kind of scale that would allow us to get a sense for where community transmission is happening and where it might not be, then we've probably got some measures that may be happening very quickly because mayors and state governors are having to act on the assumption that community transmission is happening everywhere. Now, that said, I think if a measure like a long-term curfew or even a more draconian measure were challenged in the courts are very comfortable with the situation of uncertain evidence and requiring a best available evidence standard. But they would really want to understand that any kind of restrictions were not, for example, politically motivated or that they had been adopted in the absence of consulting appropriate experts. So it's not that they'd have to have perfect information, just that they'd have to follow best practices and act on the best available information.
Thank you so much. That's Lindsay Wiley of the Washington College of Law. About 10 seconds here. Jason Kelly, Bloomberg Business Week.
Grasso, I'm in Sleepy Hollow, New York. I am broadcasting.
We have a bureau there.
We have a bureau. As of now, we're going to look at the markets and try and make sense of everything that's going on.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I'm June Grasso. This is Bloomberg.
That saying, success breeds success, it's true.
Are we seeing any improvement?
Today is your day. Visualize your goals. Grab the bull of opportunity by the horns of ambition. Because there's two yous in future. Which do you want to be?
Or leave the motivation to vitality. With our life insurance, you could save up to 40% on a Garmin fitness watch for a little nudge to exercise a bit more. Now that's real motivation. Search Vitality Life. Life's better with Vitality. Variable discount. Postage and packaging terms and conditions apply.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, sliced down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
Yeah, but you're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that.
Skip, you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
On this week's On the Media, the president thought he could defeat the narrative of COVID-19 with his usual tactic of, quote, censorship through noise. But the virus is proving resistant.
People's lives are going to be disrupted on a daily basis, and as that happens, the alternate reality he's created is inevitably going to implode.
Catch On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC Studios on TuneIn today.
Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
A PAC needs someone to follow.
It's got to be important for somebody to have a breakout moment.
Don't look now, but they're behind you.
Imports declined 2.8%.
Bloomberg Daybreak.
Sources tell us that agreement is expected to include commitments on U.S. intellectual property.
With Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager.
Could we see that play into the results and the forward guidance?
Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube and from Jason Kelly's home. Welcome to Bloomberg Business Week for this Monday, March 16, 2020. Jason Kelly, it is the new world order because of the coronavirus.
Everything is new and different, that is for sure. I'm literally broadcasting here from beautiful Sleepy Hollow, New York. Happy to be with you, at least virtually. Carol, we're practicing a little social distancing, but what a market we've got in store for us to talk about today.
Well, I said a new world order, and that includes the financial markets. Of course, we had a financial market-wide circuit breaker for the third time in a week. And also, as you said, Jason, extreme levels of volatility and really our world continuing to shut down. And for some industries, that means some assistance is necessary. So we're going to cover all of that over the next few hours. In the meantime, let's get a check on those markets. Here is Doug Krisner.
Well, let's pick up with that theme. The industries that have been suffering, you got to put airlines at the top of the list, right?
Totally.
Given the travel restrictions.
Yes.
So what we're hearing is that the airline industry is now seeking grants and loans totaling as much as $58 billion from the federal government, as well as some temporary relief on various taxes. This caused shares in some of the big carriers like American and United to be whipsawed. Both were halted for volatility moments ago. They are now trading again. UAL shares right now down 10%, but they had been weaker by more than 15% earlier. On the other hand, American Airlines stock is trading up by 6% right now. Not a good story if you're long equity markets. Hyper-aggressive move out of risk as we continue to discount worst-case scenario on the economic toll from the outbreak. Dow Industrial Average right now down more than 9.7%. In the broader market, we've got the S&P weaker by 9.3%. Financials being very hard hit. Interest rates coming in on the long end. If you look at the 10-year, we're down 22 basis points in yield at 73 basis points. Financials, as you might expect, some of the collateral damage here. We've got the KBW Bank Index down the most since 2009 today. It's weaker by about 13%. In the NASDAQ market, composite index weaker by about 9.4%. And the S&P 1500 apparel retail index having its worst day on record, down 17% right now. But the dollar is caught a bid. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up 0.2%, and a rally into the Japanese yen, a 105.93. So we're stronger against the yen, or the yen is stronger against the dollar by about 1.6%. I'm Doug Krisner at the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Carol and Jason.
All right, Doug, thank you so much. This is Jason Kelly and Carol Massar here with you on What a Monday, Carol. I am like
I feel like it started actually Sunday, don't you?
It did. Well, it definitely did. You and I were texting last night as all this was happening.
Right.
I think I sent you an expletive text message when the Fed moved, and we were diving in at that point. And this was coming at a time, full transparency, where Bloomberg and a lot of other companies were kicking contingency plans into place. We're going to talk about that, the effect on Wall Street, both in terms of trading, but also in terms of daily life, because ultimately, this is not just a financial market story. We know that.
No, exactly. And it's impacting as we all just try to either get to work, or as many of us are working like yourself, Jason, at home. So we're going to look at that and look at some of the different industries. We're also going to talk about, here it is it different this time around? The world facing another crisis together, and yet we're not necessarily, despite what happened over the weekend with several global central banks, we're not necessarily seeing from a leadership perspective and different governments kind of all acting in a coordinated effort. And that has some implications to it.
It absolutely does. And you're hearing that from the governors of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. They are acting and saying pretty explicitly they are doing the things they're doing in part because there isn't the federal direction that they may be looking for. Let's set the Business Week agenda in the meantime. I believe you've got some experts there with you in the studio.
I do. Michael McKee right next to me, international economics and policy correspondent at Bloomberg News. He's here in our Interactive Broker studio, along with Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg News. And God, where do I start? Because I feel like I just want to talk to both of you at once. First of all, Dave, just quickly set where we are in terms of markets.
Oh, it's a broad-based decline. I mean, you've got 14 stocks in the S&P 500 higher at the moment. That's it. One thing that does kind of get your attention, though, is what's going on with the casinos. And I say that, remember last week Boeing was tapping its credit lines just to stay in business, to be able to have enough cash to tide it over. Today, we saw MGM Resorts do the same thing. Just a few minutes ago, they came out and disclosed that they're planning to tap as much as $1.5 billion in backup loans. Well, MGM shares are down 26.5%, and other casino stocks are really taking a hit. Now, this group hasn't been front and center so much as the airlines and the cruise lines and a lot of the other areas affected by people's unwillingness to travel. But certainly it's front and center today, given what MGM had to say.
And front and center, Michael McKee. I mean, man, when the Fed did that move on a Sunday, just a few days before its regularly scheduled meeting, after it had already done an emergency move, took us down essentially to zero. God, what did you think? I heard you on the press call talking to Jay Powell.
Well, what it comes down to is, Dave, who are the banks? that they're taking down these credit lines from. And where are they going to get the funding if everybody wants the money at once? That's what's behind the Fed's move. The Fed is especially with the discount window, the Fed is trying to say there is enough cash in the system. With all these companies and small businesses who may be closed down or otherwise in trouble, you're going to have cash flow problems, and that can gum up the system. And then they decided this could be a financial system problem.
So that's why the Fed did what they did.
That's why the Fed did what they did. So if you're looking at the stock market and saying the Fed failed, you're looking at the wrong thing. What's really interesting to me is you look at the bond market today, and we saw yields drop, of course, when the Fed cut rates, but they didn't hit the lows of last week, and they have gone up since yesterday afternoon. So at this point, it looks like the Fed has had some success. I don't know enough. I don't have enough of you inside the plumbing to know if we've really loosened up, but it looks like we're getting there.
And so, Mike, next up, fiscal? Like, what happens next? What else needs to happen from a government and regulatory and sort of oversight government perspective?
Well, a couple of things. There may be some areas of the financial markets that do need some additional help, and everybody's pointed to commercial paper. I haven't seen the numbers today, but if that continues to be somewhat stalled, then there would probably be some sort of Fed lending facility like they did back in 2009 and 2010 for commercial paper. But the Congress changed the law, so now they have to get administration permission for that. Plus, they have to set it up. So that may be why they didn't announce anything yesterday, or they may be hoping that the repos that they're doing will loosen that market enough. Then on the fiscal side is two questions. One, what do you do about industries that are in trouble, like airlines, hotels, cruise lines? Again, Congress changed the laws, so the Fed can't directly lend to them. They can lend to industries, not individual companies, but again, it has to be with administration permission. And when they did that in 2008, the Congress and the Treasury took the first tranche of risk. So they would be looking for some sort of backstop from them. Then finally, you look at when we start growing again, how do you, what kind of fiscal help do you need? And that's going to take longer to get through Congress because they can't really agree on anything. And they haven't even passed the keep paying people sick leave bill that the House passed last week. So we're not going to be there anytime soon.
All right, Mike, last question to you real quick. You've been doing this a long time. What does this remind you of, if anything, or are we really in uncharted territory here?
Well, I think we're in uncharted territory, perhaps maybe a little bit of 2001, 9/11, because we didn't know what was happening. And so...
And very specific industries, not dissimilar from today, are impacted.
But the issue is, how long is this going to last? We didn't know then. We don't know now. If we knew that, then we could make a bet.
Yeah.
And the question is, if you bail out airlines, if you bail out, Carnival, or cruise lines, if you will, then where do you kind of stop it? Someone's tweeting at me like, what about theme parks and everybody else is being impacted?
Yeah, somebody said that the lobbyists on K Street in Washington are lining up to get their industries.
Movie theaters, why not?
Yeah, it's kind of endless. All right, guys, thank you so much. Michael McKee, of course, international economics and policy correspondent at Bloomberg News, along with Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg News. All right, let's get a check on world and national news headlines. Here's Bob Moon in our 1130 newsroom.
Carol, governors in many U.S. states are pleading with the Trump administration to coordinate a national response to the coronavirus pandemic as bars and restaurants prepare to restrict service and millions of workers and students stay home. New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, home to more than 22 million people, struck a regional agreement to shut movie theaters, casinos, and gyms as of 8 p.m. today, with restaurants serving takeout and delivery only. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan is taking similar action.
I have just enacted an executive order to shut down all bars, restaurants, movie theaters, and gyms across the state, effective at 5 p.m. today.
The U.S. Senate, meantime, has canceled this week's recess to take up a bill providing sick leave, unemployment benefits, and free virus testing. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports from Washington.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the House will introduce still another bill to deal with the coronavirus crisis and its economic consequences. The Senate has before it the bill the House passed just before it went on recess for this week. But small business organizations object to sick leave requirements, and some Republican senators are echoing their complaint. And the Senate may be taking up the extension of national security surveillance procedures first. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
A group of 7 leaders held a video teleconference to coordinate responses to the coronavirus after some European leaders were upset by President Trump's move to impose a travel ban without consulting them. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just announced Americans are exempted from a border ban. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon.
Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrow enjoy each other's company.
Most of us don't speak Mandarin. John, do you speak Mandarin?
I do not speak Mandarin.
I just wanted to check that.
Almost as much as they enjoy grilling economic experts.
When this is over, do you bounce back or is there a lasting weakness to it?
Which means that you will enjoy listening.
If things get worse, we're ready to do more.
Bloomberg Surveillance, weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
What if you could keep the top economic experts in a conference room next to your office without having to feed them?
Do we need better optics? Do we need some substance? Do CEOs care about ESG?
We have seen quite a lot of stimulus pumped into the system already.
It's the biggest warning yet about the financial risks of climate change.
Now there are more ways to hear us. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and at BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Okay, kids, Dad's gonna teach you how to dance. First, spread your feet apart. Then, pump your knee, nod your head, shake your hips, and bite your lip ever so slightly. Now, with one hand in the air, point at people with the other hand. I call that the rock star.
Dance like a dad. It's a great way to make a moment with your kids.
Now, make a face like it just smells something bad.
Visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging...
They call me the drum guy, being around London, one gig to another. I carry my tom-toms, bass and stalls, snares and cymbals, hi-hat. Won't mind a helping hand while I board a taxi. That's why I choose Ola. With driver's quality assessed by DriveTech, ride the change with Ola. Download and sign up now. Enjoy no surge pricing until the 12th of April.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Apply by the 31st of March for a chance to win your first year in halls. Visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
In the left passenger seat, we've got Dan the Widowmaker. In the right, Face Smash Steve. Oh, a solid left hook from Steve. Blocked by Dan. Dan's got him up against the ropes. Going for a signature pile driver slam. But Steve's wriggled away like a greasy snake. And Steve's got him in a chokehold. He's got him! He's got him!
Boys, pack it in back there. I'm trying to drive.
Sorry. Your mate's more likely to crash with passengers in the car. So don't drive him to distraction. Let a mate concentrate.
The Mona Lisa is only 30 inches tall. The world's hottest chili, 1 inch. And Napoleon, taller than a Great Dane, but only by 71 centimetres. Who says small can't make an impact? The Peugeot 108 Allure is now available for just $159 per month, with $159 initial rental. Our small but mighty car that doesn't have to cost you a small fortune. Peugeot Motor Company PLC, a credit broker not a lender, will introduce you to PSA Finance UK Limited. Personal finance lease, 48 months at 159, 18 plus, guarantee may be required. Terms, eligibility and return conditions apply. You will not own the car.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
Yeah, but you're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that yet.
You know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
We're at 17 past the hour. Let's get you caught up on market action here on Bloomberg Radio. We're seeing a hyper-aggressive move continuing out of risk assets. Heavy selling, volume is robust, and the Dow now down nearly 10%. In the broader market, S&P 500 weaker by just about 9.5%. NASDAQ Composite down 9.5% as well. So a lot of the extraordinary measures undertaken by central bankers really have done little to change sentiment and improve a rapid deterioration, not only in the global outlook, but in markets writ large. I mean, look at what's happening in the bond market now. 10-year Treasury is yielding 71 basis points, so we're down about 25 basis points on the U.S. 10-year. Let's take you to the airline space now. American and United Airline shares had both been halted previously for a lot of volatility. This around the time that we were learning the industry is seeking grants and loans totaling as much as $58 billion from the federal government, as well as some temporary relief from various taxes. Right now, shares in American down 0.3%, and UAL shares down about 15% right now. Let's take you to the S&P 1500 apparel retail index, having its worst day on record with a loss of about 19%. A handful of retailers announcing they will temporarily shut their stores to prevent the spread of the virus. That obviously going to adversely impact their top line. During the European session, we had shares in Roche, the drug maker, picking up about 3.4%. The company saying its corona test now available in labs in the U.S. In terms of the dollar, right now the dollar strengthening against the majors with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index rising 0.2%. The yen rallying here at 105.95, so we're up against the greenback by about 1.5%. You're caught up on markets. Let's get back to Bloomberg Business Week.
We certainly are. Doug Krisner, thank you so much. Well, lots going on, and there's more moves by countries and cities around the globe to mitigate the effects of the coronavirus. Here in the U.S., it's really kind of a patchwork of moves by governors and mayors across the country. Safe to say, though, Jason, it's been a pretty severe response. Here to talk a little bit about that response and whether it makes sense is Dr. Dave Westner. He's professor of biology at Davidson College. He joins us on the phone from Davidson, North Carolina. Dr. Westner, really appreciate your time on this Monday. It has been a severe response. I've had a lot of people say, wait a minute, are we overdoing it? Are we?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on today. Yeah, that's a great question. It has been a severe response. I think there's so many unknowns with this virus that a severe response is warranted. If you look what happened in China, I mean, they had a much more severe response, and within a month or so of that, it seems like they were able to get under control the number of new infections. So, I think that's the goal here. If we implement these strategies now, are we going to mitigate the effects over the next month or so?
Excuse me. And so, Doctor, tell us about what makes this one different, because it feels severe. Again, we don't have broad testing yet here in the United States, and so maybe the numbers are skewed a little bit, but it's terrifying, candidly, to see the numbers coming out of Italy and other countries. Help us understand, what's different about this.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's a question a lot of people have. Just to back up a little bit, I guess, coronaviruses are not entirely new. We've known about coronaviruses for half a century or more, and indeed probably a quarter to a third of what we'd call the common cold is typically caused by coronaviruses. It really was 2002, I guess, with the SARS outbreak, which was a coronavirus, and then 2013 with the MERS outbreak, which again was a coronavirus, that we started seeing this family of viruses as potentially major impactors of human health. I think so SARS and MERS had fairly high mortality rates. With MERS, about a third of the people who were infected actually died, which is extraordinarily high. Both those viruses were not easily transmitted from person to person, though. So with this virus, we're seeing a related virus in the coronavirus family that is more easily transmitted from person to person. And I think that is really the cause for concern. Even though the mortality rate seems to be significantly lower than SARS or MERS, we're seeing many more people become infected much more quickly.
But that's
I think that's a big worry.
That's what. Okay, and help us with this, because this is the conversation, I think, especially as we see our cities and our states being, self-quarantining, if you will, and shut down completely.
Right.
I guess the question is, and people have said this, that if what we keep hearing from officials who are telling us that most people will be fine, some people won't even know they have the virus, and that really those most at risk, whether it's the elderly or those who have some kind of illness, that those are the most vulnerable. I mean, is it correct to say that most people will be fine, and then because of that, is the spread of the virus still that worrisome?
I think, yes, most people will be fine, but that doesn't mean the spread of the virus should not be worrisome to all of us. Your average person, relatively young, relatively healthy, yes, all the information suggests if that person gets infected, they'll probably be fine. They'll have a minor cold. They may be completely asymptomatic. They may have flu-like symptoms. But the real concern is, those people can transmit the virus to others. And if that virus then gets transmitted to a more vulnerable population, the elderly, people with underlying medical conditions, it's going to have very severe consequences. And if those numbers go up, the healthcare system is not prepared to deal with that many people coming in with severe consequences.
And so, Dr. Wessner, you've heard a lot of the same things we have from Dr. Fauci and others about the length of this sort of new life that we're living in. What do you make of that? I mean, is this a 2-month thing? Is this a 3, 6? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and we don't know. I mean, this is something we haven't seen before. We don't really know. If you look at influenza, there's been a lot of comparisons between this and influenza. We pretty much know every year influenza cases are going to decrease in March, decrease again in April, be almost non-existent in May. If that turns out to be the case for coronavirus, great. It's going to be gone relatively soon, but we don't know if that's going to be the case.
Well, and I'm going to say that just listening to other medical coverage as well that we've been doing on our network is that some are saying we don't know because it's now showing up the virus in some warmer locations. So we don't know that those warmer temperatures are going to shut down the virus. I guess it goes back to there's just so much we don't know about this particular strain of the coronavirus that really explains some of the hysteria and understandable shutdowns. Dr. Dave Wessner, professor of biology at Davidson College, on the phone from Davidson, North Carolina. Jason, coming up, we're going to talk about one of those industries that's really getting nervous.
We are. And some politics.
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, Jason Kelly. This is Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks are resuming their sell-off, sending the major averages back to their lows for the day. Traders are increasingly fearful as the coronavirus pandemic slows economic activity. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 2,287, the S&P 500 down 255, the Nasdaq Composite down 753. As demand for airline travel dries up, airlines are pleading for a government lifeline. The industry is seeking up to $58 billion in grants and loans, as well as temporary relief from various taxes. With or without government directives to close, more Americans are staying out of restaurants. Open Table reports restaurant reservations and walk-ins nationwide last night were down by nearly 50% from a year ago. Apple says it will appeal a $1.2 billion French fine for alleged anti-competitive practices. It's the latest crackdown on Silicon Valley by French antitrust regulators. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
The market's in focus every business day. The P&L Podcast with Paul Sweeney and Lisa Abramowitz.
Are there some sectors that you want to have more or less exposure to?
What's behind this engine of gains?
Analysis of the day's Wall Street action.
The U.S. market looks relatively safe.
From Bloomberg Intelligence, Bloomberg Opinion, and influential newsmakers.
Ward McCarthy joins us right now.
P&L with Paul Sweeney and Lisa Abramowitz. Listen today on Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Are you interested in a challenging...
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Apply by the 31st of March for a chance to win your first year in halls. Visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, sliced down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league, to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
Yeah, but you're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that
Skip,
yet.
you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with the author of a fictional story about a global pandemic that right now feels all too real.
All I did was just drew upon the trends. I just extended them. Unfortunately, real life seems to have outraced even some of my imagination.
Lawrence Wright joins me on the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC Studios. Listen to this episode on TuneIn today.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
Because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires. Which means always BYOB. No. Bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
News without analysis is like half a bridge.
Why is the debt to GDP ratio still so important?
Those things, once they're set in place, stay around for years.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Well, coming up, Carol, it's certainly coronavirus top of mind last night when Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders got together and obviously started with an elbow bump, but actually I thought had a substantive conversation.
I have to tell you, to be quite honest, I didn't watch. I was so consumed by the market news.
Carol A. Masser.
No, I was consumed with what was going on in the markets. Anyway, we're going to get back, though, to politics and also talk about the airline industry. First up, though, got to check in with Doug Krisner.
Dave? No, it's Doug. We're seeing this continued move out of risk assets, Carol, and I'm looking at the VIX right now, very elevated. This is the volatility index measuring S&P 500 volatility. It's up 35%, 7781. The Dow right now is down nearly 10%, S&P 500 down more than 9%, and the NASDAQ composite weaker by more than 9% as well. So, as you were saying, Carol, last night the Fed went all in, cut rates to the zero bound, but it obviously has been unable to arrest a lot of the concerns in market sentiment is really deteriorated. We also had the Fed pledging a bigger balance sheet, $700 billion in new bond buying, some of that with U.S. sovereign debt, some of it with mortgage-backed securities. And on top of that, today we had the International Monetary Fund pledging to mobilize $1 trillion of its lending capacity. Very little impact as well. What does it all mean? Well, look at bond market reaction. 10-year Treasury is down more than 25 basis points. We're at 71 basis points. Banks are being very hard hit. The KBW Bank Index down nearly 14% right now.
Well, they cut they stopped it. They said they're not going to do any more buybacks, right?
How can you when you've got your net interest margins just cratering, right?
Exactly.
When you've got rates, the yield curve is now just a flat line here. Yeah. So it's not surprising you're going to see a sell-off, but you're absolutely right. They have pulled in from the stock buyback and they have redoubled their efforts to help their clients. That's what we're hearing from the big banks.
Exactly.
Transport jet fuel getting crushed today along with diesel and U.S. gasoline futures. This is the XB1 commodity contract on the Bloomberg terminal, down more than 23%. Crude oil over the last several weeks has been stubborn in holding $30 a barrel, right? We broke through that today. We're at $29.05 with a loss of 8.5%. So safe to say, a rout in risk assets.
No doubt about it. All right, we got to talk politics, Jason Kelly.
We have to. Last night, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders got together in a studio, not in front of an audience. Kevin Cirilli, we know, was watching it, chief Washington correspondent for Bloomberg Radio and Television, host of Bloomberg Sound On. That's coming up later on 99.1 in D.C. He joins us from Washington. All right, Kev, amid all of this, there is still a nominating contest going on. What'd you see last night?
Well, first of all, three things. First and foremost, you've got primaries that are being delayed as a result of the pandemic. And then secondly, it was really a substantive debate last night. Both former Vice President Joe Biden as well as Senator Bernie Sanders only really attacking each other's records and not making it personal. They also, this is the third point that I would make, they also rarely mentioned the president's name. There was some analysis that was done at the conclusion of the debate that found they really focused on how each of them would have responded and would respond to the pandemic. Senator Sanders used it to double down on his assertions for Medicare for All. The former vice president used it as an opportunity to talk more about his leadership style and how he would have conducted it. And, Biden really using terms so far as to say that there needs to be a mobilized effort equivalent to World War II. And so from that standpoint, it just is a broader illustration of how much the pandemic has really injected so much uncertainty, obviously, into the lives of every American and every citizen in the world, but also into the longer-term election cycle.
Well, yeah, you do wonder, what else might potentially have to change as a result of this, Kevin. I mean, we've got another round of primaries tomorrow. I mean, Americans, can they get, or those folks who need to be voting, can they do it?
That's a question that those individuals are going to have to rely on their local governments in order to get that guidance. And of course, people listening, you can go to your local government websites to make sure that you get that guidance in terms of the voting. But beyond that, it's also worth noting that a lot of these folks had pre-election voting and began voting, early ballot voting, several weeks ago. So that's a part of this as well. There's been also some in Washington, D.C. who have just raised the issue as campaigning for the year is changed dramatically. No more rallies, no more town halls. There was no live studio audience last night. And so that's just something else that I think top campaign officials on both campaigns are working through as well.
And Kevin, do you think that could lead to a scenario where maybe Sanders, who is not the front runner at this point, maybe backs off just a little bit? I mean, certainly, as you say, the tone was, they certainly were disagreeing on certain things, but it felt like a more cordial tone than we've seen in many of the previous debates.
Absolutely. And both candidates reaffirmed that whomever the Democratic nominee is, that they would do everything in their power to campaign for the other person. Biden made that very clear. Sanders made that very clear. And just, speaking, it almost is surreal to see all three of the campaigns, the president's reelection campaign, Biden campaign, Sanders campaign, to see them put out, not them per se, but their collective campaigns, to be putting out these, it's almost like they're living in a vacuum, these attack emails and fundraising at this time. I mean, it's nonsensical. And so I think you're going to notice some significant changes in the coming weeks to just how even on that level they communicate. I mean, it's quite striking, when you're talking about just the moment that we're in, and you've got then you've got these emails for fun.
Well, and one last question, just got about 30 seconds. You do wonder, we talk about longer lasting impacts as a result of what we're going through because of the virus, taking an audience away with candidates not playing to the audience or cheers or boos. It really made it a very different type of debate. As you said, they stuck to the issues. Just got about 30 seconds here.
I'll keep this tight. Absolutely. They stuck to the issues. And I got to end on a note of optimism. I just was flipping through my social media feeds and I saw that Navy ship off the coast of Italy playing the Italian national anthem. And I just thought, let's put that moment out there on your beautiful show, Carol and Jason.
Well, thank you. And we do appreciate, and all that we're all going through, to kind of end on that note is really, really wonderful. Kevin, thank you so much. I know you're dealing with a lot as well as you continue to cover what's going on in Washington and certainly on the campaign trail, which is really not happening right now because
totally
it too
different.
is shut down.
It absolutely is.
Kevin Cirilli, Chief Washington Correspondent at Bloomberg Radio and TV, host of Bloomberg Sound On 99.1 in Washington, D.C.
All right, let's get some headlines, world and national, from Bob Moon. Hey, Bob.
Jason, the latest on the ongoing health concerns over the coronavirus. The World Health Organization is calling on all countries to ramp up their testing programs as the best way to slow the advance of the coronavirus pandemic. WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says the UN agency is recommending that all confirmed cases, even mild cases, should be isolated in health facilities to prevent transmission and provide adequate care.
Some countries have expanded their capacity by using stadiums and gyms to care for mild cases, with severe and critical cases cared for in hospitals Another option is for patients with mild disease to be isolated and cared for at home.
Here's the complication. Healthcare leaders in the U.S. are voicing concerns about the readiness of the nation's hospitals. Dr. Peter Hotez at Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development says America can't allow a repeat of what happened in China.
If we reproduce in the United States what happened in Wuhan, it's game over. It's lights out. If we have multiple frontline healthcare workers, ER physicians, nurses go down in this epidemic, a situation where we have colleagues taking care of colleagues in the intensive care unit, there's nothing more destabilizing for the United States, and we have to make this our highest priority.
Some hospitals, especially in the hard-hit state of Washington, have already seen shortages of personal protective gear worn by healthcare workers. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
In-depth.
Online shopping can be a minefield. Often something that looks too good to be true probably is. Whether it's sold-out concert tickets, a half-price holiday, or discounted designer shoes. Don't be fooled. Always use a secure payment method and check who you're buying from is genuine. At Lloyds Bank, we believe nothing is more important than our customers' trust. And together, we can keep your money safe. Lloyds Bank, by your side.
Do you go on the same holiday every year? To the same country, in the same hotel, with the same sea view, visit the same ancient monuments, lay by the same dolphin-shaped pool, meet the same Barrys and Sandras, and wear the same Hawaiian shirt that you'd never wear at home? Then maybe it's time to switch it up, starting with the all-new Vauxhall Corsa, with its bold styling and up to 70 miles per gallon. To switch it up, visit your local Vauxhall dealership or search New Corsa. Official WLTP test figures for comparison purposes only. Real-world figures may vary.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league, to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
Yeah, but you're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that
Skip,
yet.
you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
And agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
We are at 47 past the hour, so about an hour and 13 minutes to go in today's session. Volume is fairly robust. We've traded more than 10.3 billion shares so far. The high, 52 weeks, which just occurred last week, 19 billion shares traded hands in a single day. So we're closing in on that, but I don't think we're going to get to that level. Who knows how the final hour will shape up. Right now, Dow Industrial Average minus 9.8%, S&P 500 down more than 9.2%, and the NASDAQ Composite weaker by 9.5%. So a real move, an aggressive move out of risk and into havens. But I say that kind of very cautiously because look at what's happening at the price of gold. We are down more than 2% now. Spot prices at $14.98. That's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah,
but
totally.
if you look at what's happening in sovereign debt now,
people, they don't even want gold. They want cash.
They want cash. And U.S. Treasuries to some extent. So we're up more than 2 full points in price on the 10-year, down in yield to around 73 basis points. So we've come in by 22 basis points alone. That's going to aggressively or adversely impact the banks. In terms of the airlines, this is a space we've been monitoring very closely. American, United shares were both halted earlier for volatility. The industry is now seeking grants and loans totaling as much as $58 billion from the federal government, also looking for some temporary relief from various taxes. Consumer staple stocks showing the least pressure on a relative basis. Today, I thought this was interesting, Carol. Analyst over at Jefferies saying American food sales could surge an extra $90 billion in 3 months.
Can I tell you, I did some shopping over the weekend. I couldn't believe how crowded. You know, we're not supposed to be around a lot of people. Man,
nobody. Were hoarding,
everybody.
Weren't you?
No. Everybody ignored it though when it came
Doomsday
to going
scenario.
To supermarkets. Totally.
The cold cellar is all stocked out.
It's unbelievable.
All right, so we've got volatility spiking with the VIX up more than 34 points right now. We're at 34%, I should say. We're at 78. That's the reading. WTI crude oil down 9% now. We're just under $29 a barrel. Carol.
All right, Doug, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser in our Interactive Broker studio here in New York. My co-host, Jason Kelly, out there at home. And this is how we're doing it, folks. Interesting story on the Bloomberg today about how Wall Street.
It's one of my favorite stories, I have to say.
Yeah, getting
really
blindsided. Yeah, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's Wall Street getting blindsided, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, in some great color. I have to say, Max Abelson, and he knows this, is one of my favorite writers at Bloomberg because he just gets things other people don't. He gets insights into the titans of Wall Street that few do. He joins us on the phone from New York City, as does Joel Weber, the editor, of course, of Bloomberg Business Week. Max, I want to start with you first. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Thank you so much for asking. I'm great, especially when I hear you're live on the air compliment, which means so much to me. But I do want to give a shout out to my colleagues, Sridhar Natarajan and Kathy Burton, who helped me build this story about, Wall Street. I think, whether or not you really adore and admire, the financial services industry, or if you despise it, or if you're afraid of it, the thing that I think we'd all agree on is that Wall Street seems to have this ability to look around corners and to make money from the ability to predict what's next. And what our reporting showed is that just did not happen here. That this existential crisis happened without Wall Street seeing it coming, and that's what our story's about.
So, Joel, what do you make of this? You have, both as the editor of Business Week and formerly the editor of Bloomberg Markets, you have a keen understanding of this type of person and sort of the behemoth that is Wall Street in many ways. Did this surprise you? What did you see in this story?
Well, I think the thing that we kind of hit on with Max, and we reached out to him sort of middle of last week and said, hey, this thing's happening and, it's starting to turn into a bloodbath and everything's turning red. Like, what is the mood right now? And he just was able to talk to some people who we don't normally get to talk to. And what really struck us was just literally how blindsided the top echelons of Wall Street were by this. And it's funny, and even since he wrote the story and we published it last Friday, it's been sort of interesting because I've been seeing things like comments at Davos pop up. And even then, like the coronavirus situation in China was something that was on people's radar a little bit. But those comments feel so dated when you look back at them already, because I think everyone just underestimated, obviously, how big of a global phenomenon this was going to be. And, looking at all of those comments and these comments from the highest levels of Wall Street, it goes to show you here, we had this epic bull market forever. And one of the favorite things everybody talked about was like what could bring this thing down. And yet the thing that has brought it down, like literally wasn't a thing that anybody was pointing to.
Well, and I think what's fascinating is these are the individuals we kind of turned to. Certainly the president did, bringing all of the big bank execs to Washington to say, okay, where are we? What's going on? Is this a financial crisis? And, these are the folks that we often look to say, okay, how bad is it? Where are we? And the folks we look to that hopefully get an early indication that something's worse than what everybody thinks. And, Max, that's not what we got. These guys were as equally surprised.
That is a great observation, and I think maybe the difference might be is that this is not a financial phenomenon that then infected the real world, which I'm old enough to remember the 2008 financial crisis when financial mechanisms ended up nearly taking down the rest of the world with it. In this case, it's a public health crisis that then infected the markets, and I think that might be what's confusing and upsetting and frustrating to financiers. And then, of course, I mean, it's worth pointing out that while Wall Street didn't see this coming, but it's also a real-life calamity impacting millions, if not billions, of people around the world. So it's I think even the Wall Street billionaires we talked to had a sense of this is hurting a lot of people all around the world.
Max, what was the thing that struck you the most? What was the anecdote that really jumped out at you? You have a keen nose for these.
Okay, well, I wish I could brag about my own nose, but in this case, Sridhar and Kathy did the reporting that gave us this just gorgeous opening scene where, you have truly the masters of the universe that we care about here at Bloomberg News. You've got John Paulson, you've got David Einhorn, you've got Dan Loeb, you've got Goldman Sachs. Goldman gathers those three hedge fund magnates together with others in a literal Midtown Manhattan steakhouse the Sunday before last. And the scene we have isn't, a scene of swagger or a scene of understanding the world. We have a scene of people trying to figure out what's going on. And of course, that is when the fight between the Russians and the Saudis break out. The oil market falls into chaos. We have the scene of these men all on their phones, staring into their phones as I think it's a stock futures that get halted. And then a few, not long after that, we have Mark Lasry, the billionaire co-founder of Avenue, who also co-owns the Milwaukee Bucks. To his credit, he said on the record to me, I remember telling Joel about this, he was basically like, look, I didn't think this was going to happen. I thought everyone was going to calm down. And until recently, I just totally misunderstood this thing. And it's always kind of nice to hear people, whoever they are, just kind of like be honest about it. It's in a weird way, it's kind of rare, but I hope it's what makes this the business week piece fun.
I have to say the Columbia University professor quote that you have in this story, or the three of you have in this story, I guess runs a program in financial engineering, said Wall Street executives may not have seen this coming because they don't understand the pressures on regular people. And even a Goldman Sachs former managing director, you guys quote, I do think financial people live in a different world. So you do wonder about what they miss because it's just not what they see on a normal basis. It's a must read. Really appreciate it. Max Abelson, finance reporter, Bloomberg News, on the phone from New York City. Stay safe, along with Joel Weber, as well, editor of Bloomberg Business Week, joining us on the phone in New York as well. All right, quick check on the markets. S&P 500 down 236 points, a decline of 8.7%. The Dow down 9.4%, 2174 to the downside. And the NASDAQ also looking at a decline of 9%, down 711 points off our lows. But man, that's a pretty significant sell-off. This is Bloomberg.
That saying, success breeds success.
Right now at TradePoint, get 4 for 3 on a huge range of laminate flooring and tiles. Plus, if you've loyalty discount, you'll get this on top. So for a great deal on flooring and tiles, get to TradePoint. The value of every fourth item per single transaction in descending price order will be deducted. Offer ends 30th of March, subject to availability. See tradepoint.co.uk.
Hello, I'm here at the Race for Life 5K, joined by Jackie Clark. Jackie, what would first place today mean to you?
I think you've got the wrong race, love. This is Race for Life. This is about beating cancer, not getting a gold medal.
And how did you train for this event?
I just turned up. It's a walk in the park, literally. Why aren't you doing it? Trainers on, let's go.
Anyone can help beat cancer. Will you? Sign up to Race for Life now, in partnership with Tesco.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Leave it to the New York Times to make the most intelligent pop music podcast out there.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast.
On the Popcast, the Times music staff gets together for a weekly roundtable on the hottest topics in popular music. From award show autopsies and reactions to new releases to difficult-to-process scandals and emerging themes in the music landscape, hear distinguished music critics share their perspectives on the latest music news, songs, albums, and artists of note on the New York Times Popcast. Search and favorite Popcast to join the conversation.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league, to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
You're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that
Skip,
yet.
you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
At Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York, I'm Doug Krisner. It is 3 p.m. on Wall Street, so we have an hour remaining in today's session where the volatility has been substantial, particularly when you look at the downside price action, a kind of a hyper-aggressive move out of risk assets today, despite the Fed going all in late yesterday with that rate cut to the zero bound and an expansion of the balance sheet to the tune of $700 billion. Right now, the Dow Industrial Average is weaker by nearly 9%, just off the session lows. In the broader market, S&P 500 down about 8% as well. And we're seeing in the NASDAQ market, the composite index weaker now by about 8.5%. In terms of volume today, right now more than 12 billion shares have traded so far as we enter the final hour. In the bond market, 10-year Treasury down 23 basis points. We're up more than 2 full points in price, actually about 2 1/4 points. The yield on the 10-year dropping to 72 basis points. In spite of the yields coming in, we've got dollar strength with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index rising 0.3%. The euro stronger here at $1.11. And that would be higher against the dollar by about 0.5%. But the big move is into the Japanese currency, where the yen is stronger against the dollar by about 1.4% right now, trading 106.18. Talking about some of the airlines, specifically American and United Airlines, they were halted a short while ago for a lot of volatility, and we had the industry seeking grants totaling about $53 billion, so kind of mixed trading in the airline stocks right now. For latest coverage on COVID-19, head to Bloomberg.com/coronavirus. Carol.
Yeah, we do want to take everyone to a live press conference with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy happening in New Jersey. Listen in, everyone.
This is going to be in these two pod situations. There's a lot of people have a lot of concerns about testing.
Yep. Let me give you a couple of general comments, and I'm going to ask Judy and Pat to each weigh in. Let me repeat something that we've repeated over the weekend and on Friday. Remember that the big volume of tests are now being done by private sector, non-Department of Health entities, whether they be literally private sector or hospital systems. So Judy will correct me, but something like 80+% of the positives that increased that we reported today came from outside of the Department of Health. And just recognize that the good news is the scale is significant, the speed is significant, but we insight into the actual specifics and the data of each of those tests. I want to just say that as a general matter. Judy and Pat will get into this. These are and both. We never, by the way, I never committed to having anything up and running today. We said, I think I said as of last Friday, by this coming Friday, we would have a meaningful uptick in the amount of testing capacity, both the front end intake of specimens as well as the back end, which will overwhelmingly be private sector processing of those specimens. It's and both. It's both what we've been pursuing on our own in the state, and we had all along intended to begin that in Bergen County. Judy's also, I can't even recall at this point because I know you said it to me privately. You've been aggressively looking at the potential for in-home testing in addition to drive-through. And then on top of that, over the weekend and in particular this morning, based on the actions of the federal government on Friday with the state of emergency, FEMA has come into play here, which we would not have been talking about, for instance, over the past several days. So it's and both. Any quick color, Judy, on top of that, and then Pat.
Sure, I'll talk about all of the above.
You want to
Thank you. The Bergen County Community College situation. We were working with County Executive Tedesco over the weekend to bring that up as quickly as we can. We've put together the technical guidance. We were getting the appropriate PPE for the individuals that would take the specimens. And then we got a call that FEMA would come in and do it. So, of course, we said, fine. And we're working with FEMA because they will bring in the PPE and the specimen collection kits. And what's important about that is we're trying to preserve as much PPE as we can from our own stockpile for particularly hospitals that need it. So the FEMA pod will be at Bergen. So there won't be one. It'll be at Bergen. We'll get it up as soon as we can.
Do we have any idea how many people a day have the capability of getting tested at this point right now?
In one of those drive-thrus? So in one of those drive-thrus, by the way, I would bet you, I don't know when it will be, I don't want to marry myself to a day, so forgive me for this. That may be the first one. It ain't going to be the last one. I'll be surprised if we don't have a day when we're sitting here with you and we've got them in most, if not all, the counties of the state at some point. I think these are intended to be able to deal with 1,000 or more.
Yeah, I was looking for my notes.
1,000 to 2,000, I think, even a day at one venue.
one of the reference labs told us that they could handle up to 5,000 tests a day. These are high-frequency labs. They can process a lot of tests. As far as setting up one of these testing sites, traffic control is a big issue. Making sure that all the individuals are appropriately screened. Making sure that they have a primary care physician or an ordering physician so that the test results can get back to them and into our system if it's positive. All of those situations have to be handled. Most of the testing sites right now, and we did a survey throughout the United States, most of them are handling 200 to 300, as high as 500 specimen collections a day. The average seems to be about 250.
Pat, could you add some color that would want to others?
The only thing I would add, and I think to the commissioner's point about that assistance, that folks, it's not going to be like a fast food situation, that there has to be those what do you want to refer to, criteria in order to pull up and go through. So if you imagine 1,000 cars in line, I don't think that's going to happen here on a daily basis, David. But I think that assistance that you put out was key in how these are going to get set up.
You'll need a doctor to recommend, though, yes?
You need to be pre-qualified to go in, correct? At least.
On the video conference call with the vice president and president, it's my understanding that they suggested to governors that you use your own supply chain to get PPE. What was your response to that? What was other governors' response to that?
Yeah, I didn't see it as a black and white, you're on your own. It was, George Helmy will correct me, I think we put our first request in for PPE, Judy, 2 weeks ago at this point at least. We got a fraction of that, and we're happy for it, Thursday night into Friday. I spoke to the vice president Friday night. I reiterated with the president and vice president today. We needed, A, more PPE, B, boots on the ground via FEMA, and C, we're going to need a lot of economic health because this is going to, these steps that we're taking.
Governor Phil Murphy briefing the tri-state area, really.
All right, you've been listening to New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy there with an update in terms of the situation there in New Jersey. And we've been hearing from certainly various mayors and governors around the country. Governor Murphy announcing statewide restrictions for the state of New Jersey beginning at 8 p.m. tonight that will severely limit business operations and really discourage individual travel. It's all about, Jason, as we know, extraordinary efforts to slow the spread of the novel coronavirus. And that is what's going on. They also announced that all schools in the state would close indefinitely starting on Wednesday, including public, private, and parochial schools from grades pre-K to 12, as well as all colleges and universities. And, you know, that's what's really picked up. You and I were talking about it on Thursday, Friday. I feel like things certainly shifted into another gear in terms of really the world as we know it shutting down.
It absolutely did. And what you really saw, it feels like, was governors, mayors, as you say, really spring into action, taking matters into their own hands, really trying to influence public behavior. And I do think part of what has spurred them to move, you think about the power of social media in this regard. There were so many tweets and Instagrams and stories over the weekend about people out at bars and people living it up. There's some great stories on the Bloomberg today, one by Anders Mellon, who we're going to talk to later, about spring break sort of going on as planned in many ways. A lot of reveling going on there. And I do think the state officials and municipal officials looked at that and said, we got to shut it down. You know, people candidly can't sort of be left to their own devices because college students are out of school and they think, well, we should get together and hang out. And candidly, getting together and hanging out is the worst thing you can do right now.
Well, and that's what's resulting in a ramp up of cases. In New Jersey specifically, their confirmed cases in New Jersey surged by 80 for a total of 178 with 2 deaths, largest one-day increase since the first confirmed case in the state of New Jersey. That was on March 4th. So this is what we're seeing, right? As We are not able to, as we know, contain the virus at this point. You're trying to mitigate it, but as a result, we weren't able to do that earlier on, and so the number of cases are ramping up dramatically, and that's why you're seeing everybody now cut down and make sure that schools are closed, businesses are closed, social activities have stopped, so that you do not have these large groups of society still getting together. This is what's key in terms of containing it. This is what we've heard from so many of the doctors and members of the medical community that we've spoken with.
And meanwhile, this just crossing in San Francisco requiring people to stay at home except for essentials, effective at midnight. This is from the mayor of San Francisco. San Francisco will require people to stay home except for essential needs. Necessary government functions and essential stores will remain open. These steps are based on the advice of public health experts to slow the spread of COVID-19. This is where we are.
All right, so you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Jason Kelly on this Monday. Continue to track that sell-off in the markets. We do want to get you caught up, though, on world and national news headlines. For that, let's bring in Bob Moon once again. Bob.
Carol, so this is what's going on. You're not listening. That message from authorities in the state of Washington today, who are taking new action to crack down on public movement to show they're serious about stopping the spread of COVID-19. It's an effort to seize the moment. State leaders say there's a lack of residents adhering to social distancing needs, and that's forced them to enact tougher rules. King County Executive Dow Constantine says it's now necessary to order many non-essential businesses to shut down.
We are at a critical moment in this crisis. We're leaving the phase of COVID-19 outbreaks in concentrated areas of the county, and we're entering the phase of potentially rapid and widespread infection.
More blunt words today from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who announced he's closing his country's borders to anyone not a citizen or permanent resident or U.S. citizens amid the coronavirus pandemic.
Canadian travelers should return to Canada via commercial means while it is still possible to do so. Let me be clear. If you're abroad, it's time for you to come home.
Trudeau announced the move today outside his residence, where he is self-isolating after his wife tested positive for the new coronavirus. He also asked Canadians to stay home as much as possible amid the pandemic. His remarks came after he and the other group of 7 leaders held a video teleconference to coordinate responses to the coronavirus outbreak after some European leaders were upset by President Trump's move to impose a travel ban without consulting them. Trump's economic advisor Larry Kudlow acknowledged sometimes testy relations between the allies. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon. Carol, Jason?
Bob, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Let's take a look at what's going on in the world of economics. We are awaiting a briefing, we should mention, from the Vice President. He will be coming to us live from the James S. Brady briefing room at the White House. But in the meantime, economics really drove the story going into the trade today. Carol, you and I were mentioning at the top of the show. We talked about it via text last night, everything that was happening. Kathleen Hayes is with us, global economics correspondent for Bloomberg. Carl Riccadonna joining us on the phone from New Jersey. He is, of course, the chief U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics. Kathleen, I want to start with you. What did you see last night? What did it tell you about the actions that the Fed is taking and then that market reaction?
Well, the market reaction, of course, I think there's just so many people who either say the Fed must know something we don't, or, oh my God, now they've used all their ammo with that 100 basis point rate cut, so there's nothing more they can do. But I think the Fed's view is this. We know that even 100 basis point rate cut on top of the 50 basis points we just did will not stop the economy from slowing down because of the coronavirus. All the steps we're being told to take are going to, by definition, slow the economy for now. And people will be spending money, and businesses are going to have to try to get extended credit from their banks. And the Fed realizes it has to step up to provide liquidity. It's not, again, rate cuts aren't going to solve the coronavirus crisis. But I think the Fed's thought is if we do this aggressive move with the rates, if we buy $700 billion worth of bonds, if we have other measures as well, like, making it cheaper to have dollar funding globally, we will prevent the coronavirus crisis from turning into a financial crisis. That's what this is about. Will it work? We don't know. Right. Stocks don't like it, but bonds have rallied like crazy today. You got nearly a 5 point rally in the 30-year bond.
Tremendous.
Bonds are loving this, man. If you were holding bonds, I think you made some money.
So, Carl Riccadonna, come on in on this. I was listening to you on my trip in this morning. You were talking very specifically to our Bloomberg radio team, Bloomberg Markets radio team, very specifically about what you need to see or what we should maybe see in terms of fiscal policy to really help out those folks and ultimately help out the U.S. economy.
Sure. Good afternoon. First of all, to Kathleen's point, I think the Fed does have access to a vast array of business and financial sector contacts, and what they're hearing is clearly not good news if they decided to take two emergency moves during the intermeeting period. So the Fed is not just acting proactively here. They are seeing that financial markets are not functioning in a deep and liquid fashion the way that they would